Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It had been a normal morning, predictable, standardly routine, you could say. Of course, there had been the usual mayhem that we would get every morning, as the children got ready to go to school. I have two sons, Paul, that was 10 at the time, and Mark, who was 12. Then there was my daughter Rebecca, who was 13 years old. Let's just say, as any parent can fully understand, it's always a nightmare to wake them up and get them ready for school. Suffice to say, Rebecca, like a performing clockwork clown, was the one who kept us waiting, as she dilly-dallied around, and was always looking for something she'd lost last minute. When we were halfway down the drive, always when we were halfway down the drive, "Ma'am, I can't find my textbook. Ma'am, I can't find my sweater," were the chorus of words I would expect to hear every morning from her. And they were regular as the morning pop-up tarts she ate every day for breakfast. She was what they might describe as a scatterbrain, who was predisposed to being so dreadfully forgetful, while my sons were a pleasure, as they caused me very little grief. They were always ready on time, never creating the inevitable hold-ups of my daughter, who was like that major accident on the highway, spawning congestion and a very uncongenial traffic to build up and reach a standstill. Rebecca was always like that. My husband was not slow in reminding me that I was exactly like our daughter when we went out to any social engagement, when quite suddenly I couldn't find a single thing that I was looking for. I would procrastinate, start to panic, and subsequently I would successfully hold us all up. And it would be ages before we finally got going. He knew exactly what I was like, so he would cunningly tell me that we had to be at a place by 6, when we were really only expected by 7, so that we would arrive on time. Had poor Rebecca taken after me? Had I passed on some less than desirable genetic traits to my poor daughter? It would seem so. The very thing that infuriated me about her the most was the thing I despised about myself. My two sons were the spitting image of my husband, not only physically, but like their father, they were pragmatic, practical, level-headed and neat. Their bedrooms were always tidy, without even a sock out of place. But Rebecca's disorganized room looked like a hurricane had hit it, as if her whole topsy-turvy room had been spun around in a washing machine, as puddles of her clothes would lie in tangled, muddled heaps on the floor, haphazardly strewn over upholstered chairs, and dangling precariously on the edge of a hanger in her closet, looking as if in any second they'd drop off and fall to the closet floor below, to join the other forsaken piles of clothes. My mother affirmed that I'd been like that when I was young, so I decided to cut Rebecca some slack. I'd hated how hard my mother had been on me growing up, about the state of my bedroom. She had goaded me tirelessly to tidy up all the time. I remember I used to throw everything into my closet, closing it tightly behind me. It would be bursting at the seams, but the room always looked halfway decent, and my mother was none the wiser. Rebecca looked a lot like me, with long brown hair that she wore in 2 pigtails and green eyes, whereas my sons looked exactly like my husband, black short curly hair, hazel eyes and cute dimples on their cheeks. We lived in a delightful symmetrical double-story farmhouse in Colorado. My husband ran his own very successful business. He sold guitars from a musical store in town, and he gave people private tuition after hours, as he was passionate about teaching people how to play. My husband had music oozing through his veins, like butter melting over a hot bagel. But me? No, I wasn't musical at all. I'm afraid I knew as much about music as a bushman knows about the municipality tap water. Even when I was at school, my musical teacher told me I was tone deaf, and I have since been told by one of my sons that when I sing I sound like a bullfrog. I answered him back by assuring him that some bullfrogs don't sound half so bad. When I became a mother, I didn't realize how brutal it can be when your kids tell you the absolute truth. They don't hide behind nice words to appease you or to soften the blows. They'll tell you exactly what they think. My husband will tell me I look great when we're about to go out, but one of my sons will derail the compliment almost immediately by fortuitously saying, "Ma'am, you look like a canary in that yellow outfit. Whereabouts are you going in that?" On another occasion my daughter might spout, "That dress you're wearing with the flowers all over it, it makes you look like an old woman. It looks like you bought it from a thrift store and that it's been hanging in someone's closet since the 3rd century AD. There is one benefit from kids. They're so forthcoming with the truth, and that is when they tell you that you look $1 million, you know that you actually do, and you can leave your home with a measure of confidence, having won their approval. Because believe me, they know all the current trends, what's in, what's out, and what just isn't a good look. And I take their opinions very seriously. On this day, what I thought would be a pretty routine morning, I regret to say, ended up being anything but. It's funny how life can sometimes surprise you and take you off guard, and not always in a good way, I hasten to say. Let's just say after dropping my kids off at school, I picked up a little shopping and returned home to my Colorado farmhouse in my white Volkswagen CTI. I was really expecting it to be a run-of-the-mill predictable day, where I'd embrace the regular routines of daily life. Then I'd pick up my kids from school in the early afternoon. We lived on a sizable plot of land, where we had about 6 horses, a couple of goats, who my children told me, and tirelessly complained, were very, very smelly. Then there were plenty of free-range chickens, and 2 adorable mixed-breed dogs that we rescued from the pound. Our property consisted of rolling meadows, rugged outcrops, a plethora of trees, a stable block, a barn, and some outbuildings. I've always thoroughly enjoyed Colorado. I love the spectacular mountain views here, the big blue sky, all the trees, the flowering meadows, and the wild animals we get in this part of the world, of which there are many, that have graced our path and ventured onto our property from time to time. I parked my car in the driveway and proceeded to take my shopping into the house, where I laid the brown bags onto my pristine granite countertops, when moments later, out of my kitchen window, I see an unknown sports car rolling down my driveway, a shining blue Corvette. I'd seen that sports car before around town, but unexpected visitors landing on my doorstep without forward warning and notice always gives me a little anxiety. Who could this be? Then I see her. She's climbing out of her car. She's dressed to the nines, as if she stepped out of a bandbox. She's wearing a short leather skirt and a tight-fitting red shoestring top with red high heels. But then I know this woman. Well, I don't, and I do. I'd seen her around town before, and every time I'd been unfortunate enough to encounter her, she'd been unusually aggressive towards me, for no reason at all. And now here she is, marching bumptiously up to my front door, with an audacious swagger, shaking her poofed-up long mane of fake blonde hair, with a defiant, haughty determination. What the hell does she want? Her face looks as if it's rigidly set in stone, with that formidable, truculent look that gives you the impression that if you rub her up the wrong way, she might just bite. The kind of person you approach with caution, like a red warning light on the highway. The first time I bumped into this strange, pugnacious woman, I was in the grocery store, standing at the delicatessens counter. She brazenly pushed me to one side quite abruptly, and said with a confrontational assertiveness, "Excuse me, I was here first." I immediately apologised, but I knew she hadn't been there at all. She had appeared from nowhere, like a vulture descending on its carcass. Then there was another time when I was standing on the street corner, with a coffee in my hand, one of those regular portable coffees you pick up from a coffee shop, with a plastic lid, and she went impudently swinging past me, bumping into me deliberately. My coffee went flying onto the street and dribbled over my feet and actually burnt me. I could see the cheeky woman glancing over her shoulders at me, and there was a delighted smirk growing on her face. I remember looking at her agog as if to say, "What the hell is your problem, woman?" Then there was the time that I was shopping and turned around to find my trolley filled with dozens of boxes of hemorrhoid creams that had appeared from nowhere. And then this woman walks past, looks into my trolley and says, "Oh dear, I see you've got a a little problem. A pain in the bum, you are?" And she prances off. I could hardly believe it, the nerve of it. I suspected she had dumped all the hemorrhoid creams into my trolley, but I couldn't understand why she'd done such a nonsensical, strange thing. It was odd behaviour from a stranger whom I didn't know. The worst thing happened was when I returned to my car in the parking lot one day and could see this woman getting into her sports car and driving away. But my car had been deliberately keyed, and there were broken eggs on the windscreen. For some reason, this obnoxious woman, whoever she was, didn't like me at all. I didn't know her from a bar of soap, and couldn't fathom why she had such an axe to grind with me. I've always been reserved, a reticent person. I have experienced rude, objectionable people before in my life. Of course I have. Who hasn't? But nothing like her. I always bite my lip and hold my tongue when encountering such unhinged bellicose types, rather than reacting adversely to them. Some people might think you should stand up for yourself, fight your corner, but sometimes it's not worth fighting back, as there are people that won't back down from an altercation, and it can end up coming back to bite you. Believe me, I know. I had learnt this salient lesson a long time ago, playing out in my own life, when I was an impressionable little girl, and the experience left an indelible mark on my life that has influenced the way I react to belligerent people. I always remember my mother was driving her truck with me next to her, seated on the passenger seat, and the truck from behind her appeared to be hooting at her to get a move on. My mother was furious to have someone bullying her like this, as she knew she was driving at a reasonable speed. "What an idiot," she says to me. "That man behind us is downright obnoxious. I'm going at the speed limit and he's pushing me to drive faster. What a dreadful bully. He's driving like a maniac and I'm slowing him down." She made another fist at the driver, and finally when he overtook her she honked her horn, and once again gave him the fist. But it didn't end there. When we got to the next stop sign, the man got out of his truck. He was well built, like a bulldozer, the kind of guy that must eat over a dozen eggs for breakfast and 3 large chickens for lunch. He had more muscles than anyone I've ever seen before. He was hugely intimidating, with the face of a bulldog, although a bulldog is cute, and he was not. Suffice to say his heavy-set body was like that of the Terminator in his prime. I remember he thundered over to our truck, swinging his arms manically, like a capriciously belligerent elephant in musk. I'm sure he secretly wished he was one, as he'd loved nothing better than to crush our truck beneath his feet like a couple of roaches beneath a heavy pair of boots. The incandescent man was sweating indignation as salty beads of perspiration ran down his forehead, and his skin had turned a bright red colour. He stormed to our car and viciously slammed the side panels of my mother's truck, glaring in at her with the coldest dark eyes I have ever seen, that I swear almost turned as black as coal. I remember being so terrified, I was trembling like a leaf. This hostile, vindictive man looked like he was going to kill us. "Woman," he screamed, "don't you dare raise a fist at me, or honk your horn at me like that again. Or next time you're dead," he said, making that cutting sign over his neck. And then he was gone, marching away to his truck and driving off at a manic speed. So his truck rattled precariously as he accelerated. But for a brief second, I held my breath, hardly daring to believe we'd had such a lucky escape. I had sensed deep down in my gut Our confrontation could have been so much worse. I knew from that moment on that I would avoid ruffling people's feathers, especially of unfriendly birds, for one could not be sure of what they are capable of. We were to find out years later, looking in a newspaper report, when we saw a familiar face, the same man who we'd encountered that day, on the front page of the newspaper, glaring at us blazingly from the headlines with a title that read, "Road Rage Turns Deadly." The offensive man who had challenged us had now been convicted of murder in the 1st degree for stabbing a man to death in a fit of road rage. The picture showed him being arrested by the police. He was wearing the same menacing look he'd given us when he had fortuitously crossed our path. My mother began to shake like a wobbling blancmange jelly as the memories of that event came flooding back. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. "Don't you remember, Izzy?" she said, showing me the picture. "That was the man who pounced on us that day. Remember how terrified we both were? I remember we were sobbing. Look, he's only gone and killed a man. They say he might be linked to other road rage incidents. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Incidents where fatalities were involved. People found beaten up and stabbed. So it seems like we had a lucky escape that day. We were very, very fortunate. I can hear the woman I just witnessed banging my front door. Forget the doorbell. She hasn't bothered to use it. Forget a gentle, kind knock. She wouldn't know the meaning of that. This woman is pounding the door. I become like that frightened girl again, sitting next to my mother in her truck, shaking like a leaf, when the giant predatory man charged towards us that inauspicious day, wearing that pugnacious "I want to kill you" expression on his face, like a badge of pride. What should I do? I wondered. Should I pretend I'm not here? But she'll know I'm here. My car is parked outside the door. Should I hide? Should I avoid answering the door? I mean, why should I open the door to a woman I don't even know? A woman I've seen around town who has been purposely vindictive towards me. The knocking continues. "I know you're in there, Isabella. Now open the door now. I need to speak to you." I gasp in abject astonishment. Do I know this woman? How does she know my name is Isabella? Maybe I went to school with her, and she's changed so much over the years that I don't recognize her at all. Maybe I said or did something back then, all those years ago, that upset her, and that's why she's so mad. People can harbour hurt and resentment for a long period of time. But then again, I was never a bully at school. Surely not that. The very idea is ridiculous. After all this time. But then I'm running out of probable scenarios, and that is the best one I can come up with. "Open the door, Isabella. I need to talk to you." I walk over towards the door, but I don't open it. "Who are you? What do you want?" I say. "I'm not going to hurt you, Isabella. I just need a word, that's all, a word." "I'm sorry, but do I actually know you? I've seen you around town. But who are you?" "Just open the door, Isabella. Open it. I can't talk out here, can I? I'll explain everything when you let me in. You can't leave me standing out here all day because I'm not going to leave, and you've got children to pick up later from school. What are they going to think if you abandon them like that?" Against my own better judgment, I cautiously open the door to peer at my visitor through a tiny crack, and the impertinent woman wastes no time. She pushes right past me, barging into my house, and trotting over to the kitchen with such a presumptuousness, as if my home actually belongs to her, and not the other way round. "Some coffee would be nice. I like mine with milk and sweetener. Have you got any sweetener?" I nod. I think so. "Then get on with it, will you?" There is something irksome about this woman's disquieting demeanour that scares me rigid, just like that intrusively provocative man with the road rage incident all those years ago. I want to scream out, "Who the hell are you? What do you think you're doing barging into my home like this? Get out and go away!" But I can't say a thing. My mouth is like a goldfish, opening and closing. The words don't come out. My actions are almost robotic. I just do what this woman says, as if she's holding me at gunpoint. But hypothetically, she actually is. I feel that dreadful surge of fear, leaping over my body like it did when I was a little girl. But I try my level best to hold it together. I can't let this frightful woman see that she's unsettled me. because that would please her very much. She watches me preparing the coffee and does not say a single word. My hands tremble. Finally, I hand her a mug of coffee, and she points for me to sit down. "Sit over there, Isabella. I've got something important to tell you, something that you're not going to want to hear, but it needs to be said." I sit down very stiffly, holding my mug tightly in my hands so that the white knuckles are showing because I'm so nervous. I've never met a woman that intimidates me this much. Her manner is brusque. She looks like the kind of woman you'd be terrified to say no to, for fear of some rather alarming repercussions or consequences. "Do I know you?" I ask her again. "I mean, I've seen you around town before." I omit to mention her rude treatment towards me on such unfortunate encounters. "I am one of your husband's guitar students. My name is Cherry. Me and your husband are having an affair. We're very much in love, and he hasn't got the heart to tell you that he doesn't love you anymore. So I've taken it upon myself to tell you the truth. I refuse to be his bit on the side, you see." "What?" I gasp. "My husband having an affair? No, he wouldn't do that to me. You're lying. It's not my husband's nature to cheat. I know him very well. He's just not like that." The woman smirks. "Well, then you don't know him very well, do you, Isabella? If you must know, your husband has been keeping my bed very nice and warm for me of late, and you haven't suspected a single thing, have you?" Poor little Isabella. So naive, so blindly ignorant. Your husband wants to file for divorce, Isabella, but he's so afraid of upsetting you. He says you're like your daughter Rebecca. Dopey and scatterbrained are the words I think he used. You've always got your head in the clouds, and he can't stand it. He says everything about you makes him sick. He can't stand the sight of you. Look at you, in your scruffy sweatshirt and jeans. You're hardly eye candy, are you? You don't even make an effort with your appearance, do you? Maybe if you tried a bit more, Isabella, he wouldn't have got so bored and tired with you. Still, it's too late for that now, isn't it? You've cooked your goose, Isabella. Now you're going to have to eat it, aren't you? And by the looks of things, it's a dry, rather stringy bird, she says scathingly, sweeping her disapproving gaze over my sweatshirt. Your husband, Isabella, is so dreadfully bored out of his skull with you. Look at me. I'm a complete knockout. Do you know how much it costs to keep me looking like this? The difference between me and you, Isabella, is I actually invest in myself. But you don't give a damn about your appearance, do you, Isabella? My husband isn't shallow like that. If my husband wanted a divorce from me, he'd ask me for one. We've always been straight with each other. My husband loves me. He's always telling me so. He told me this morning. Cherry spits into my face. Are you really that stupid, Isabella? Why, I do believe you are. Just because your husband tells you he loves you does not mean he actually does. Words like I love you are robotic. They come out so easily. Anyone can say I love you. It doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean it's true. Now do yourself a favour, Isabella, dear. Tell your husband you want a divorce. Spare yourself some dignity, will you? Or are you so pathetic you'll remain married to someone who's so obviously cheating on you, when they don't even love you anymore? Have you got so little self-esteem, so little pride and respect? I hope not, Isabella. I seriously hope not. Otherwise I do feel very, very sorry for you. At that, the insolent woman pulls my chin directly towards her face. She glares into my eyes so vindictively. I begin to tremble like a jelly. My heart is pounding in my chest. Now you'll do the right thing, won't you, Isabella? You're not a doormat for that husband of yours, are you? Now be a good girl and do what I say. Don't see me out, she says, pushing the chair away from her so loudly that it screeches angrily over the tiled floor. I watch her swaggering off, walking down the entrance hall. She looks like she's gliding down the red carpet at a catwalk. She slams the door loudly behind her. Then she gets into her fancy blue sports car and accelerates down my drive. and even her sports car appears to be gloating as it trundles away. I am left feeling flawed and speechless. The rest of that day is like a hazy, inscrutable blur to me, where between tearful, self-pitying episodes, I am almost lost in a vacuous, hollow world, where everything has stood perfectly still, including the hands of time itself. I have become numb. It's like I don't know how to feel, or even how to react. It would seem that Cherry's haunting words are like a deadly disease that is trying to seep into my mind, to gnaw away at the faith that I have in my husband, making me begin to doubt his integrity and our solid relationship. Could anything she said be true? Could my husband be actually having an affair with her? Did he really want a divorce and an end to our marriage? If he did, I hadn't seen the signs. There was nothing in his comportment that had changed to suggest that he wasn't happy with us. Why, only this morning he told me how much he loved me. The woman was so insistent, so aggressively demanding, so masterfully persuasive. Her words were like a cantankerous sharp knife slicing through bone, marrow and sinew. Was there any truth to what she was saying at all? I reasoned that she wouldn't barge into my home shouting the odds like this, persuading me to file for divorce if she wasn't engaged in an affair with my husband. I mean, who would ever do that? Something didn't feel right about all this, but assimilating this woman's words was like swallowing sharp thorns that tore at my throat. It really hurt. I went through the motions of picking my children up from school, but my mind was 100 miles away. My children were passing commentary on why I seemed so caught up in another world. "What's wrong with you, Mummy?" asks my daughter. "I've asked you 3 times, do we have any peanut butter?" "Of course we do, sweetheart. It's in the upper cupboard over there." "Since when do you put peanut butter in this cupboard?" asks my daughter, looking at me strangely. "Are you sure you're all right, Mum? You look kind of peaky, a little bit white." "Rebecca's right," said my son Mark. "You look funny, Mum. It's as if you're in another world. It's like we're talking at you, not to you. You look quite upset. Are you sure everything's all right? Nothing bad's happened, has it? You would tell us if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course I would, sweetheart. I wouldn't keep anything from you, you know that." My son looks heartily relieved. "So Granny's all right then, is she?" I look up at my son in surprise. "Why would you ask such a strange question?" I asked, looking at him perturbed. "Of course your Granny's all right. Nothing bad's happened to her. She's absolutely fine." "No, it's just I have a friend at school. He told me when his Granny died they didn't tell him for a while. He returned home to his parents whispering and behaving really odd. They didn't want to tell him that bad news, you see. I wouldn't want you to not tell me if something bad had happened to Granny. You would tell me the truth, wouldn't you?" "Sweetheart, if anything happened to anyone we loved, I would tell you, no matter what. I couldn't keep stuff like that from you." "Phew, that is a relief. I'm so glad." "Look, kids, I'm taking myself for a walk. I think I need a bit of exercise and fresh air. I've got cobwebs in my head. That's why I'm all over the place. I'm just a bit distracted today, that's all. But I promise you I'm absolutely fine, and I won't be very long." "It'll do you good, Mum. You really do look a bit odd. The fresh air will do you good. Would you like me to come with you?" "No, I'd rather go alone, sweetheart. I need some time to myself." I observed my children giving each other sideways glances. "Keep the dogs inside, will you?" "Why don't you take them with you?" asks Paul. "They'd love the exercise, Mummy." "No, I'd rather go on my own, sweetheart." As I open the front door to leave the house, I hear my son Mark saying, "What's up with Mummy? She's behaving very, very strangely. It's like her mind is miles away." "Well, maybe she's had a bad day," says Rebecca. "Mummies and daddies get bad days from time to time, you know. It's hardly a crime. She just needs her space, that's all." I am so relieved to be out of the house. I can hear the dogs barking as they scratch at the door, obviously upset to have been left inside, when they could sense a walk was brewing. But I needed to be alone with myself. I was going to have to speak to my husband about all of this. I was going to have to find out if he had been cheating on me, and whether he did actually want a divorce. And the thought was eating me alive. I adored my husband. The idea of a life spent without him was no life at all. I'd be left feeling like a large carpet being tugged out from beneath the furniture, where everything would topple, collide, and cause chaos, pandemonium, and upheaval. The prospect of losing my husband was like this, more than I could possibly bear. Had our relationship been all but a farce? No, surely not. I'm not sure what time it was exactly, but it was late afternoon. The sun was softening. Its bright, warm shafts of light became somewhat subdued, slowly fading, replaced by a smouldering, ethereal, almost floating glaze that was very beguiling. It twinkled through the trees, and cast rainbow-like prisms over the ferns and the foliage, so that everything gleamed under its magnanimous shadows. It was difficult to be sad in this glorious oasis. I always gravitated towards the woodgrove when the world was getting on top of me, when my life was presented with arduous challenges like this that I needed to overcome. Somehow being surrounded by the vast splendour of nature dwarfed my problems, eased the troubles in my heart, with such a maternal, nurturing reassurance that invited within me a tangible sense that everything was going to be all right, and it usually always was. The trees in the woodgrove were so proud and tall. They plunged the skyline with a stately deportment. Their needled boughs glistened in the dancing residues of sunlight that bounced gregariously through the canopy, while the bird song filled my ears with pretty tweets and chirps. I laughed as I saw a squirrel nibbling an acorn, eyeing me through its dark, twinkling eyes. And just for a brief moment, I almost forgot my troubles, and I actually smiled. I thought about how much easier, how much less complicated it would be to be a squirrel, or some other animal in the woodgrove, without being consumed with the kaleidoscope of human emotions that could so easily weigh you down with their heaviness. I wanted to feel as light and carefree as that squirrel, who looked as if his only concern was the acorn he was eating. I moved through the forest, crunching the leafy twigs and needles beneath my walking boots that were scattered liberally over the earthen floor. And after that, I remember nothing. It's like I went for a walk, and then I remembered nothing. I don't recall tripping or falling over. I don't recall fainting or sitting down or even falling asleep. It is as if I suffered from that phenomenon of missing time or amnesia that people often talk about. I was to find out later that an hour of my time had simply vanished, in which I had no recollection of anything that happened. So what happened to me in that missing hour? I'd love to know, for its memories, its essence, its recall have abandoned me like a balloon on the wind. But I did wake up to find myself on the forest floor, lying on a bed of moss, covered with an animal pelt. I looked up to see this large, mysterious creature watching over me, her eyes filled with an expression of grievous concern, as she studied me curiously. I can hear the words in my head. "I thought I'd lost you for a moment." I now know I have to be dreaming. I must be. I rub my eyes. I even pinch myself to make absolutely certain that I am not imagining this. But this is no dream. This is real. I stare at the creature, my eyes widening, my mouth dropping wide open in astonishment. "Are you real?" I ask her. The creature looks at me and taps my back, as if to reassure me that real she most certainly is. I know that this creature is a Bigfoot. I don't even have to second-guess this. My son Paul is a huge Bigfoot fan, and he would have given more than a month of Sundays to see what I'm seeing now. I'd always been clandestinely amused at my son's passionate interest in the ambiguous creature. But never for a fleeting moment or second had I ever entertained the prospect that a Bigfoot could actually be real. But I'd been thrown off my perch to embrace a sobering realization. These creatures are real indeed. The creature does not look like the Patterson footage I'd seen once. She is remarkably human. Her face very symmetrical, her features very feminine, her dark, soulful eyes deep, but so filled with a genuine warmth, a nurturing kindness, a matriarch type of energy. If I'd caught sight of her, I would have been seized with trepidation and fear, for she is lofty, tall, imposing and majestic, exceedingly intimidating. Imagine a lion charging towards you, but in your presence he behaves like a playful dog, oblivious to how threatening he may appear. It would take you off guard, surprise you. It was like that. I would say the Bigfoot was easily 8 foot tall, 700 pounds and 3 to 4 foot wide across a very powerful pair of shoulders that would easily make an NFL sportsman's shoulder pads almost look puny and inconspicuous. Her long, lean, athletic, muscular body was covered in long, silvery grey hair that blended in with the vegetation superbly. I'm sure she'd easily be able to sink into the shadows without even being observed. The creature has the traditional pyramid-shaped head that folds seamlessly into the shoulders, without much evidence of a neck, but there is a short one. It's barely discernible. I observe that the sun is setting on the horizon, as a tangerine sky glimpses at me through the opening of the trees. The Bigfoot grabs me by my hand and pulls me up to my feet. She brushes the bracken and twigs off me that have bespeckled my clothes, and she looks directly into my eyes. "Are you going to be all right?" she asks me, her words filtering into my head like audible words someone might speak out loud to me. No one has ever spoken to me like this before, directly into my head, with words I can hear. "I'm fine," I reassure her. The creature holds my hand for a while. My hand feels so tiny in hers, but I love that she's holding my hand. It makes me feel as if I'm a little girl all over again, and I've been invited into the bosom of my mother's warmth, in her unconditional loving embrace, which I really need now, the way I'm feeling at the moment. I wanted to hold her hands forever. I never felt so safe, so loved, so secure before. I suddenly hear the sounds of my dogs barking as they rush eagerly through the woodgrove, followed by my husband. I can hear his feet crunching bracken. "It's all going to be all right," I hear the voice in my head, and then she's gone, retreating into the shadows, as if she's never existed. I suddenly hear the sounds of my dogs barking as they rush ebulliently through the woodgrove, followed behind by my husband. I can hear his heavy boots crunching bracken and leaf litter beneath his rubber soles as he nears his approach. "It's all going to be all right," I hear the voice in my head. Then she's gone, retreating into the shadows, almost as if she never existed. I feel annoyed at the interruption. I was enjoying my time with the Bigfoot. Why did my husband and dogs have to spoil this blissful moment for me? I wanted to spend more time with her. "Where the hell have you been?" says my husband, grabbing me in his arms and holding me tightly. "I've been worried sick about you. The kids say you've been gone for ages. It's going to get dark any minute." I look at my husband with a tortured, aggrieved expression, as I remember Cherry and her visit. I recall why I needed to walk in the woodgrove in the first place. "I know exactly what you've done," I say to my husband. "I had a visit from Sherry today." My husband stands still and gasps, throwing his hand over his mouth. "Are you kidding me? That ghastly woman visited you here at the house? The nerve! The bloody nerve of the woman!" "Yes, she did. She told me everything. She told me what you've been doing together, how you've been keeping her bed nice and warm, how you want a divorce, and that you think that me and Rebecca are completely harebrained, and you can't stand the very sight of us." "That woman! She's poison, sweetheart," said my husband, taking me into his arms. "You really have so little faith in me that you think I would sleep with a woman like her? Are you kidding? You think I'd willingly risk losing you, losing our relationship, losing our children over a woman like that? Do I look like stupid is my name?" "But she told me everything. She told me if I had any self-respect, I'd ask for a divorce. She said the two of you were very much in love." My husband sighs, running his hand through his hair. "There's something seriously wrong with that woman. She's not right in the head. She signed up for guitar lessons with me. At first, she seemed quite charming, really. Asked me all about my family, and about you. Most especially about you, actually. Then she became very flirtatious, and began to try and seduce me. I told her I was a happily married man, and I was sorry, but I wasn't interested, and under the circumstances that, because they were awkward, we should quit the guitar lessons, and we did. But since then she's been sending me all kinds of texts, telling me that she loves me, that we're meant to be together forever, and that I should divorce you. Needless to say, I haven't honoured any of her texts, even with a response. You need to ignore people like that. By all accounts, she's done this before. There's another man, what's his name? David Pierce, that's right. You can talk to him, and his wife. Apparently Cherry nearly wrecked their marriage, playing her treacherous little games. I never imagined she would do this to you. The woman is insane. But why didn't you tell me all of this?
I don't know. I suppose I just thought it would go away.
I rush into my husband's arms, holding him tight, the tears gushing out of me in a tsunami of grief, washed away by the joyful revelation of relief that I feel. How could I ever have doubted my husband? I knew he wasn't like this.
Why did you come into the woodgrove on your own? Should you not have at least taken the dogs with you? The kids say you were behaving very oddly.
Well, wouldn't you, if someone came and visited you and told you that they were having an affair behind your back?
Don't talk like that, sweetheart. If someone said that to me, I don't know how the heck I'd cope. Those are words I would not be eager to hear.
That's why I came into the woodgrove, I explain.
I think I get it. But what I don't get is why someone as perceptive and discerning as you would buy anything that poisonous woman had to say.
To cut a long story short, I was to discover that Cherry had a long history behind her of playing duplicitous games with married men and trying to wreck marriages. She was well known by the police, so we were able to get a restraining order on her, as many had done before. The police officer informed me that it was like Cherry lived in her own make-believe world and seemed to enjoy causing chaos wherever she went. I am still mystified as to what happened to me in the woodgrove that day, how I can remember the first part of the walk, and then nothing at all. By all accounts, I seem to have over an hour of missing time, possibly more. It's curiously bizarre, I know, but something must have happened to me. Luckily, a female Bigfoot was determined to give me help. I haven't ever seen her again, but I know she's out there. She's one of the most beautiful souls I've ever met. I have since heard horror stories about some Bigfoot accounts, but I assure you, not all of them are like that, as the Bigfoot I encountered was the kindest creature I have ever had the privilege to meet, and I certainly feel a deep love for her in my heart, as in that brief moment that I met her, she touched me like no one I know. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, there is pandemonium around our household. It's almost like doors and windows have been left open, while gale-force winds are blowing through the entire farmhouse. But this obstreperous windy activity is caused by people, not by the weather. They're darting to and fro across the lawn of our backyard, like dozens of headless chickens, frantic to get things done quickly before the big day that is looming progressively ever closer and closer, as the seconds steadily glide into minutes, and the minutes into hours. Time is moving too fast, way too fast for comfort. Indeed, if I could control it, even for a brief second, just so that I could stop and pause for a second to draw in a deep breath, I most surely would. It's almost like watching the sand slipping through the hourglass, as I wait for that moment when I walk down the aisle to marry Murray Sanderson, whom I've loved since as long as I can remember. Indeed, I'd nursed secret crushes on him since I was about 13 years old. I'd notice him at church and around our small little rural town in Montana, where everybody knew each other in passing, even if they didn't know each other personally. Let's just say I would clandestinely watch him, like a crow on a wooden post and rail fence. I'm sure he had no idea he was being closely studied by a pair of admiring eyes. Suffice to say, crows can have a fixation on sparkling things. I guess you could say my sparkling fixation was always Murray Sanderson, as no other boy held my attention like he did. I know this quintessential secret about crows, as me and my brother Cameron dismantled a crow's nest once when we were kids. We bravely climbed up the oak tree in our backyard. We discovered a plethora of shiny trinklets in the crow's nest. We were beguiled with wondrous awe when we found the old kitchen key lying in the nest, which my father had been looking for a long time, and so he'd had to change the locks in our house. Not that crime was a problem living in an old farmhouse in this part of the world, where crime was an alien word that we only ever identified with on television documentaries. It was so far from our lives. Still, you couldn't be too careful, could you? And it was wise to be prudent. Then my mother's diamond ring was lying on the branches of this nest, dangling on the edge of a little twig like a hook. She had taken it off her fingers, leaving it on the table of our wraparound porch, as she had been stung by a hornet on her finger.
and it was swelling, so she had to remove the ring, while she went to apply an antihistamine cream to the sting. Let's just say when she returned to the Adirondack table to look for her diamond ring, it had mysteriously vanished. None of us suspected that the unorthodox thief was of the feathery kind, and my mother's lost treasure was suspended in the branches of a tree, adding glamour to a crow's nest. We found glistening gum wrappers, coins, bottle tops, and pieces of aluminium foil, folded up into the nest, perfectly arranged for the crow to visually appreciate their beauty. I always rather wondered what he must have felt when he returned to his secret stash, only to discover his nest had been treacherously vandalized, and the greatest treasures he had procured over the years had been stolen back, namely my mother's diamond ring and the kitchen key, that must have been prominent aesthetic features in his nest. I knew the feathery culprit rather well. He was a regular visitor in our backyard, often hovering around the dustbins looking for another sparkling wrapper to steal for his nest. But I rather liked the bird. He had character, shining black eyes that watched everything and missed nothing. We had called him Sparkle after our discovery. He probably knew more about what was actually going on our farm than we actually did, and I couldn't help clandestinely wondering what he was making of the current activities in our backyard, where a plethora of mysterious trucks were haphazardly parked, with signs on the side panels that read Floral Masterpieces by Luciano, DJ Kings, and Joanne's Spectacular Balloons, or wedding suppliers that scurried across the manicured lawn, carrying boxes of goodies in their hands, or playing an intrinsic part in making my wedding an occasion to remember. I admit I was prepossessed by Murray Sanderson, for reasons I cannot explain, and almost certainly wish I knew. Why is it that some people can capture our imaginations, drawing us in like the bait on the end of a fishing rod? Why do we bite that bait so easily, beguiled by its intoxicating allure that may not actually be very good for us? I don't know the answer to that enigmatic question. The only thing I do know about Murray is that he had this callow, boyish face with a fresh innocence that was so captivating. Even if Murray himself was the very antithesis to the childlike face, with its dimpled cheeks and inquisitive hazel eyes that he presented to the world. A little like Matt Damon when he was young. Of course, growing up I admired him from a peripheral perspective, as staring at him would have been too obvious. Let's just say never for a moment would I have ever perceived he would have been interested in me. The hometown queen, yes, but me, most definitely not. I was a reticent child growing up, so I'd watched Murray Sanderson go through a plethora of girlfriends like you might eat a packet of M&Ms, enjoying every single flavour and colour. That was Murray Sanderson for you. Variety was the spice of his life, so he didn't get bored. I knew I'd never have the pleasure of holding his hand or looking up into his hazel eyes, but the hometown queen most certainly did. But he lost interest in her, as he did everyone else he dated. No one seemed to hold his attention for very long. He was like a spoilt boy with a brand new toy train set that was already drooling over the latest new editions currently on offer at the toy shop, as the grass was always significantly greener on the other side for the likes of Murray Sanderson. Then one day it happened. I was in the bookstore in town, going through the cookery section, as I was looking to buy my mother a birthday present. Then there he was, Murray Sanderson himself, showing off his white teeth for maximum effect in a very alluring smile that almost made my heart miss a beat and my legs crumble beneath me. Murray Sanderson was looking at me. Had Christmas come early this year? I remember his childlike face looked so animated. "Of how can I be of help?" he asked me. "You work here?" I asked him, looking rather surprised. "Yes, I work here. My uncle owns this bookshop, you know. He sometimes needs help on a Saturday afternoon, so here I am," throwing his arms up in an exaggerated gesture of exasperation, as if the last place in the entire world he wanted to be was in his uncle's bookshop. But like a bridled horse he remained tethered to the stable very dutifully to appease his uncle. "Oh, I see," I say, giggling. "Well, I hope he pays you well and doesn't exploit you then." "Don't worry about that. If my uncle didn't pay me well, I would almost certainly not work for him. If my uncle tried to take advantage of me, then he wouldn't see me for dust, and he knows that very well." "Good for you, I say. I think if it were my uncle who owned this bookstore, if he needed a helping hand, he'd probably expect me to work for free." Murray looked visibly appalled. "Well, I hope you wouldn't work for free. You should always know your own worth. Never sell yourself short. Everyone deserves to be paid. Anyway, how can I help you? I see you're looking for something, and I hasten to say I know all the books in here like the back of my hand." He pauses for a moment. "Well, almost all the books. Put it this way," he says, lowering his voice. "Some books aren't worth knowing, like some people in our small town." I laugh. "I'm fine," I say coquettishly. "I'm looking for a cookery book for my mother. For her birthday, that's all. She loves cookery books. I want to get her one to add to her collection. But judging by this vast selection, it's a minefield. The question is where to start, what to actually buy, which one is actually good. Do you know what I mean?" Murray gives me a huge grin. "Then look no further," he says, lifting up a cookbook with a title called The Essential New York Times Cookbook by Amanda Hesser. "This book is walking off the shelves, let me tell you. The recipes have all been tried and tested. They're awfully good. I had to order a whole new batch of them last week. We're completely sold out. They're in great demand at the moment. But your mother hasn't got a copy of it, has she?" "No, definitely not. I'd recognise it. I'll take it. Thank you so very much for your help." "It's a pleasure," he says, as I follow him to the counter to pay for my purchase. He looks up at me and says, "Do you happen to like milkshakes?" "Who doesn't?" I say. "Fancy joining me for a milkshake in a few minutes' time? I've got time to take off." "I would love that," I'd said. Let's just say that milkshake was the beginning of our budding romance, and I never envisaged I'd end up engaged to the young boy, now a handsome man, whom I'd nursed a crush on for so many years. I never believed that my infatuation towards him would be reciprocated. But tomorrow we were getting married. I could hardly believe it. We'd been together for 5 years now, and I had such happy visions of the future we would enjoy together, how many children we would have, where we would finally live. My chest was tight, my heart was pounding in my ears, and there were still hours to go. If I was like this now, I'd be like a bag of nerves by tomorrow morning. I'd barely eaten a thing all day. I knew that my juddering stomach would be unlikely to retain its contents, as my nervous disposition would likely cause me to vomit incessantly. I glance out of my bedroom window, in the top story of our colonial-style home, and can see all the activity on the lawn below, as people frantically dash backwards and forwards, carrying vases filled with flowers and crates of alcohol to the bar area that has been set up in a very small separate tent. The marquee is up on the lawn with its double king poles. It looks magnificent against the viridescent greens of the countryside. So many people doing all this work on my account. It is rather daunting. I hear my mother's feet dashing up the staircase as she hurriedly enters my bedroom to check on me yet again. She had insisted that I do nothing the day before my wedding. "It's all about you, sweetheart. The bride must sit back in her ivory castle, being waited on hand and foot. I don't want you to do a thing, lift a finger. This is your big day. It's all about you." "Oh, there you are, Nicole. I've been looking for you everywhere," she says, breathing heavily. My poor mother is out of breath. She looks quite frantic, as if the weight of the world is on her shoulders, as she's juggling so many things at once. Let's not kid. Arranging a wedding for 150 people is not easy. My mother is carrying a silver shoebox in her hands. "Oh, they've finally come. The lady from the wedding dress shop just delivered them to me. She had a hell of a time seeking them out for you, but she's found a supplier that had your size. Things are looking up. Thank God." She passes me the shoebox. "I was worried sick. I thought they wouldn't have your size. Just imagine, you could have been sauntering down the aisle tomorrow in your bare feet," she chuckles. "Thanks, Mum," I say, opening the shoebox to inspect the shoes. My enthusiasm is wavering. "They really are perfect," I say, as I admire the satin court shoes and run my fingers down the smooth, luxurious fabric. "Well, don't just stand there, sweetheart. Are you going to try them on or not? You need to see if they actually fit you." "It says they're my size, Mum. Do I really need to put them on right now?" "Try them on, sweetheart. I can't face the prospect of anything going wrong tomorrow." I sit down on the side of the bed, trying to slip my foot into the shoe, but my feet are too big. You've got to be kidding, says my mother, throwing her arms around her head. They don't fit. This is a nightmare. I can't believe it after everything I've been through. I will admit the shoes not fitting on my feet left a rather bitter taste in my mouth, rather reminding me of the Cinderella story, when the king's courtiers go around the kingdom, looking for the feet that will fit into the shoe, so the king can find his perfect princess, the fit for his life, the missing link to his heart. Something about the shoes not fitting cast a dark shadow of doubt on my impending marriage, I couldn't help but think. Of course, I was just being silly, but I couldn't help being a tad superstitious. My mother is now on her cell. No, she's tried them on. She's with me right now. They didn't fit. The shoes are absolutely tiny. You must have got the wrong size. That's right. Look, I'm exhausted. I've got 1,000 things to do. Yes, I've got a wedding planner, but she's about as useful as a beached whale. Honestly, that woman hasn't lifted a finger, you know. I don't know what I'm paying her for. Yes, I'm still here. Thank you, I'll appreciate it. My mother switches off her cell phone. She thinks she may have replaced the wrong shoes in the box. An oversight on her part. Just a mistake. Lucky you tried on the shoes. Thank goodness, my mother sighs. That's a relief. Once we've got your feet sorted out for the big day, I'll feel so much better. A wedding dress without shoes is not going to be a good look. My mother is studying me. Concern dapples her face. You look as white as a sheet, dear. Are you sure you're all right? She says, running her hands across my forehead. Your temperature's fine. Have you eaten? You look peaky. You need to get some food into you right now. You can't run on empty, you know. I'm just nervous. Very nervous, I say. I can't think straight. I've got butterflies in my stomach. If I eat anything, I'll throw up. I feel quite queasy. Of course you can't think straight, sweetheart. I was exactly the same when I married your father. Now you go and get something to eat, even if it's only a piece of toast to lie in your stomach. And then you must have a lie down. You'll feel a whole lot better. I know things are chaotic at the moment and everything is in disarray, but I promise you, sweetheart, everything is going to be magnificent in the morning. Just you wait and see. My mother is tapping into her cell phone, hanging on to its every promise. You'll be glad to know, sweetheart. The forecast is fine and sunny for tomorrow, she says, looking at me with bright, enthusiastic eyes. Oh, that's such good news. What a relief. When I married your father, it bucketed down with rain. It was so windy. We were almost blown off the cliff face. So it looks like the weather is certainly on your side. The marquee looks amazing, doesn't it? I just love its architecture. It's so modern and chic. You should see the table decor, sweetheart, with the white tablecloths and sparkling silverware, and the mixed displays of pink, purple and cream roses. It's out of this world. The DJ's just been to set up the dance floor and the lights. I met him. He's quite the charmer, he is. I gave him your list of favourite music. Oh, it's going to be stupendous. I just can't wait. I've been in touch with the wedding cake people, by the way. Your cake looks incredible, I'm told. I gather the porcelain figurine of the bridegroom fell off the cake, shattered into hundreds of pieces. I told them not to bother with it. I mean, having a bride and groom on the cake, it's a bit passé, rather old hat, isn't it? So they'll be replacing it with flowers, you'll be glad to know. They're delivering the cake first thing in the morning. They're going to set it up in the marquee in the far corner. It's 3 different layers, 3 different cakes, black forest, red velvet and vanilla sponge, exactly what you wanted. Just so you know, I checked with the makeup artist and hairstylist. They'll be here at 9:30 in the morning to do your makeup, to do the hair and nails. So you see, everything is going smoothly. I mean, there's guaranteed to be a few hiccups along the way, but we'll iron them all out. Just you see that we don't. Mum, just relax. Leave everything to the wedding planner. It's not your job to do everything. That's what you're paying her for. Tell me something I don't know, says my mother, rolling her eyes. That woman's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I knew I should be deliriously happy as a bride-to-be, shouldn't I? I mean, I was marrying my childhood crush after all. But something was irking me. Even the very fact that the porcelain figurine of the groom had just randomly fallen off the cake like that, shattering into hundreds of pieces, along with the wedding shoes not fitting my feet. It seemed ill-omened and very inauspicious. Yet there was something else, a deep inner haunting cry, that I could not articulate or verbalise. It was as if a vacuous hollow inside my gut, a whispering nudge, you could say, that was obsequiously clawing away at me, audaciously demanding my attention, but was far too ambiguously obscure for me to actually perceive, much like a hot air balloon in liftoff that I cannot grasp as it's taken off into the sky and is beyond my reach. Almost as if my subconscious was disclosing or murmuring a secret to me that I just cannot fathom, or maybe I just don't want to. I loved Murray Sanderson, didn't I? I mean, he was the only boy I'd ever really liked, and tomorrow I was marrying him. But were the butterflies flapping around in my stomach rarely nerves of trepidation brought on by excitability? Or was this flapping feeling inside of me that twisted my stomach into a plethora of sailor's knots something far more sinister? I couldn't be sure. I remember the day came and went in such a blur, with people dashing across our lawn like a colony of frenzied ants, being disturbed and scattered, frenetically carrying their eggs off to a safer spot. It looked just like that. I could see the uptight, exhausted, fatigued look on people's faces. My mother was standing next to the wedding coordinator, throwing her arms around like an oscillating octopus. I knew she was having some kind of altercation, so I surreptitiously opened the window of my bedroom to listen in. I'd never seen my mother so hot under the collar before. I mean, I was getting married in the morning, for goodness sake. Was it necessary for her to get her knickers in a twist like this? My mother looked livid. Her streamlined body was jiggling with indignation, like a small sapling in the woodgrove, hit by a fierce windstorm. Her golden hair was equally as buoyant, reminding me of the golden leaves on an oak tree in fall. If her hair wasn't fortunately fixed on her head, it would almost certainly have fallen off, given the feisty way she was swinging her arms around. Every part of my mother's face was puckered up, like a hideous gargoyle, as she eyed the wedding coordinator with contempt. If my mother had given me such a ferocious look, I would have almost certainly run a mile. I knew my mother wanted my wedding to go seamlessly, but her pursuit for perfection was never going to be acquired. My daughter is getting married in the morning, and I've done all the work. I'm appalled by your disinterest in my daughter's big day. I mean, you call yourself a wedding planner? What is it you advertised on your brochure? Oh, let's see. We take all the stress out of your big day so you don't have to lift a finger. Look at my fingers. I've almost got calluses on them. I've been working so hard. But look at you. Oh, no, your nails are perfect. I bet you haven't even cracked your nail varnish yet. What have you actually done? Tell me, young lady, what have you actually done? What am I bloody paying you for? To sit back and look pretty? No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I could see my father walking over the yard towards my mother to appease the tense situation. My loyal, self-controlled father was forever the peacemaker. Sweetheart, you're exhausted. Look at you. You're very fatigued. There's no need to be so hard on Miss Barnes here. She's trying her best, and she's been a great help to us. We couldn't have managed without her. The wedding coordinator is choking up with tears. I don't need to listen to this. No one's ever been so rude to me as you've been. People like you should be ashamed of yourself. You should organise your own bloody wedding. I've had enough. I'm getting out of here. I know when I'm not wanted, and I shan't be coming back, she spouts as she runs across the lawn to her truck and drives away with a marked acceleration, as her tyres viciously rip through our lawn, leaving behind a jagged, muddy trail. I was sure she'd done that deliberately. Look what you've done, Sandy. That wasn't a very nice thing for you to do. You treated the woman most unkindly, my father says, putting a comforting arm around her. I hate to see you stressed, sweetheart. You really must try and relax. The way you're going on, you could have a coronary. Sweetheart, our daughter is getting married in the morning. There's so much to do. I've organised the dress, the flowers, the cake, the table decor, the menu. But you tell me, what has she done? A big fat zero, says my mother, making a circle with her fingers. That evening after I came up from dinner, I saw a note on my dressing table, written in black ink, in a handwriting I was rather familiar with. It said, Sis, I'm back. Meet me in our favourite secret spot. I've got some champagne on ice waiting for us. Can't wait to see you. Cameron. Growing up, me and my brother Cameron were incredibly close. He was a year older than me. He may as well have been as old as my dad. He was that protective of me. In truth, I loved my brother more than anyone else in the world, for I could talk to him about things I would never ever share with another living soul. My brother had moved to Florida. I wasn't surprised that he hadn't popped over to see my parents first, as my brother always saw me as his first priority. He'd want to see me before anyone else. My parents probably assumed he'd be arriving tomorrow for the wedding, but he was already here. He must have surreptitiously slipped into the house to leave me a note, when he could have left a message on my cell phone. It made it all the more special for me. My heart lifted with an excited ebullience that I hadn't felt all day. It was as if in a single second all my troubles had all but floated away, like a bird on the wind. I was more excited about seeing my brother, whom I had not seen for 5 months, than getting married in the morning, which seemed more than a little incongruous. I knew there was no love lost between my brother and Murray Sanderson. I'd even confided in him, when I was very little, how much I liked Murray. He had screwed up his face in a bemused disgust and said, "Why do you like him? I just don't get it." "I don't know. I find him really attractive. I guess he's got this cheeky boyish face." My brother had rolled his eyes and said, "Girls can be really strange. I can't see what you can see in him. He's a loser. You hear me? He's a loser. Believe me, I know a bad seed when I see one." When I started dating Murray Sanderson, no one was more disappointed about this than my brother. "You do know he was quite a player when I was at school. A serial cheater. He had a reputation for a roving eye that could not be tamed or subdued. I think he broke more girls' hearts than I've had hot dinners," he had informed me. "I know all about that. It's old news. Murray even admitted it to me, that he'd been a bit of a wild thing back in his day. But he swore to me he's not like that anymore. Even his mother told me that I'd work miracles on her son. What did she say? Oh yes, that her son looks settled now." "You believe Murray when he told you that his days of pursuing women are over?" my brother asked me. "Have you not heard of the old adage that a leopard never changes its spots?" "Of course I have, but I believe people can change, and I know Murray has." My brother's expression looked exceedingly doubtful. "If you say so, sis. Let's just say, if he breaks your little heart, sis, don't you dare come running to me in floods of tears. I will be saying I told you so." "You really don't believe my relationship with Murray can work, do you, Cameron?" "No, I don't, sis. It has nothing to do with you at all. Whether you know it or not, Murray Sanderson is in love with someone else, and that someone is not you." My eyes rounded with horror. My jaw dropped open. "Who?" I said, my blood running cold. "He's in love with himself, of course. Who else do you think I was talking about?" "Nonsense! He has a positive self-esteem, that's all." Of course, when I announced I was getting married to Murray Sanderson, my brother had almost looked sorrowful. "Really?" he'd said, raising an arched brow. "Why would you want to marry him, sis?" "I love him." "You love him," says my brother, "or you fancy him. What is it? There's a big difference, you know." "I love him and I fancy him." "If you love him, sis, what do you love about him?" "I like how I feel in his presence, how he makes me feel. I enjoy being in his company. Isn't that good enough? He's a real charmer. I can tell you that." "It's a start, sis, but I wouldn't call that love." I reflected over my brother's words as I gather my jeans and sweatshirt together and dash down the sweeping staircase. I can see my parents have retired to bed. I think they're both exhausted, and I know that an early night will serve them both well. I can hear my mother mumbling away in the bedroom. I almost feel sorry for my poor father, as I imagine my mother is giving him a list of all the things she's got to do in the morning, while my dad is trying to feign an interest when in truth a party for him holds about as much appeal as watching paint dry. I know tomorrow is important for him, though, as he's going to be giving me away to be married. In truth, my father has never expressed any candid, uninhibited feelings about my husband-to-be. I'm not sure what he actually thinks about my fiancé. You see, growing up, my introverted father never wore his heart on his sleeve. He's reserved, laconically placid and privately reticent. It would have been nice for him to have opened his heart and told me he actually liked my fiancé. All he has ever said is, "Sweetheart, as long as you are happy, I'm happy." I'd love to know what he really thinks about Murray, but extracting his feelings would be like ruthlessly breaking into an oyster shell to carefully prize out the pearl. My father has never been loquaciously forthcoming with his emotions, you could say. So I'm now in the kitchen, being greeted by our 2 miniature schnauzers, who are wagging their tails excitedly. I suspect my sudden serendipitous appearance has given them reason to hope that they might be given a brief run outdoors, but they're to be disappointed. Luckily they're very well-behaved dogs, who are not inclined to bark or make a commotion. "You stay there, boys. I'm going out for a little while. I'm going to meet my brother." I grab the torch, open the kitchen door, closing it quietly behind me so it locks, and replace the key under the mat. I amble past the marquee and all the outside wedding furniture, where synthetic resin wicker sofas and white canvas upholstered cushioning and teak tables adorn the yard, as if it's become a glamorous outdoor living space. It does look spectacular, even at night. I look up at the farmhouse and I can swear I see the figure of my father peering out of the top bedroom window, watching me. But after he realises I have seen him, he hurriedly pulls the curtains back. I notice he didn't seem surprised to see me in the yard this late in the evening. It is almost as if he knew I would be out here. In the old days, if my father had seen me hanging around in the yard this late, he would have ferried me back indoors, fiercely reprimanding me for such incredulous behaviour, and warning me about the perilous dangers of the indigenous wildlife. Over the years we've seen a mountain lion loitering around our yard from time to time, but it seems times have changed. Maybe he's loosening the reins on my life, having come to terms that I'm no longer his little girl, but a fully grown adult. The moonlight tonight is soft. It magnanimously caresses the velvety sky with an ethereal light, while the stars are buttoned brightly in the sky like sparkling jewels that shine down on me. I can hear the chorus of crickets and frogs serenading the evening, while my heart begins to flutter excitedly in my chest. I can't wait to see Cameron again. I've missed him so very much. It's such a beautiful evening. The weather is warm and inviting, although there's a cool breeze blowing, which is nuzzling my cheek with very fresh kisses, while the trees almost hug me with a warm, welcoming embrace. I feel incredibly enchanted in this woodland oasis, where me and my brother had frolicked in the past together. Fleeting memories tease my mind, as I hear wistful, childish laughter from bygone days, when we would aimlessly run through the trees, playing hide-and-seek together. "You'll never find me," I call out to Cameron. "I'll find you, sis," my brother will cry out confidently. "I always find you." It's strange, but those evocative, nostalgic memories are indelibly seared on this place, as if time has held them very still, as they replay themselves back in my mind. In those days, Cameron thought I was the coolest sister, as I wasn't adverse to climbing trees, lifting up rocks to look for strange creepy crawlies beneath their surfaces, of which we found many unusual specimens that we would eagerly study. We'd play cowboys and Indians together, or cops and robbers. I preferred boys' games, as playing with dolls seemed awfully silly to me, because that wasn't fun. I guess you could say I was a bit of a tomboy back then. Cameron would tell me sometimes he'd forget I was actually a girl, as I didn't act like someone afraid of getting myself very dirty. Let's just say I hadn't graced the woodgrove for ages, and I reminded myself of what a tranquil sanctuary it really was, even at night. I know every part of it so well that even the obscure features of the trees that pencil up into the sky, shrouded by the blanket of darkness, do not intimidate me at all. Instead, I feel strangely comfortable in this cosy place that harnesses for me so many delicious memories of the beautiful days I spent with my brother. Then there he is, sitting under the tree, surrounded by the light of a few lanterns. He's sitting on a blanket with a picnic basket and a bucket containing champagne. He's grinning as he runs towards me and embraces me in a very warm hug. It is incredibly good to see him. "I've missed you, sis. Really missed you. How long has it been?" 5 months and 3 days to be exact." "Wow, you been counting?" said my brother, grinning. "Sit down, sis. Let's have some champagne together, because tonight we're celebrating you." "What about my wedding tomorrow? Are we celebrating that too? Or do you still have issues with Murray Sanderson?" "I'm afraid my feelings towards Murray have not changed, sis. The man is not good for you. he says, handing me an effervescent glass of sparkling champagne. "You know I've never liked him, from when we were very little." "Of course I know you don't like him, Cameron, but I hope you're going to give him a bit of leeway. Now he's going to be becoming a member of our family." My brother pauses for a moment, looking distinctly uncomfortable. I can see by the strained expression on his face he's wrestling to tell me something. "Cameron, what are you not telling me? Out with it. I know when you're hiding something." "Nicole, you know I care about you more than anyone in the world." "Of course I do. What is this all about?" "Me and Dad. We did something that you're not going to be pleased about. But I want you to know we did it because we love you." My blood runs cold. A chill descends down my spine. "You and Dad? What did you do?" My brother is hanging his face, avoiding my gaze. "Sis, someone saw Murray in town, another town, not too far from here, getting rather cosy with another woman. This was about 2 weeks ago. They say that Murray was being very flirtatious, and it looked like the two of them were more than just friends." "Who is she?" "I don't know, but Dad had a plan. We didn't have much time to lose. You see, Dad was very concerned about Murray. He's always believed him to be a player. We're both very troubled that he's going to end up breaking your heart, so we set him up. I know it wasn't the appropriate thing to do, but we really didn't have a choice in the matter." I'm trying to process everything my brother is telling me. "We set him up. We contacted a call girl. We asked her to flirt with Cameron and to see where it would lead, because we knew what bar he frequented on a Tuesday night. Dad brought her a camera in a pen, and we got the footage. The woman told us that she merely fluttered her eyelashes at Cameron, and he couldn't resist her. My brother hands me pictures from footage so that I could observe everything. I stare at the footage in disbelief, as I see my husband is in a compromising position with another woman, their naked bodies entangled together under the bedsheets in a hotel room. I cannot believe what I'm seeing. "I'm very, very sorry, sis. Really I am. Me and Dad, we took no pleasure in any of this. But we desperately needed you to see what your fiancé was like. You were so blinded by him. We knew he hadn't changed. If he would do this to you before your wedding day, what will he do when you're married? I couldn't bear to see you go through heartbreak. The man has got no moral compass. We wanted to show you what we knew all along, that your fiancé cannot be trusted. As I told you before, once a player, always a player. I'm really sorry, sis." "So Dad was in this with you? I had no idea he felt this way about Murray." "I'm afraid so, sis. He was distressed about your relationship with Murray. He didn't believe Murray would be right for you. He knew the man would break your heart. Tell me, sis, what are you thinking? You're not mad at us, are you?" "I don't know what to think, Cameron, but I know I can't marry Murray in the morning. I can't. I can't believe he did this to me. But you're right. If it was so easy for him to be seduced like this, then he really doesn't have any integrity. And it doesn't bode well for my future. I can't marry a man like that." "I'm surprised by how stoic you're being, sis. But I'm afraid Murray is coming towards us right now. Don't look yet. But I invited him over, so you can have it out with him. He needs to acknowledge his treachery to you. He thinks he's coming here for a celebratory romantic drink before the wedding." I look up to see the figure of my fiancé walking through the woodgrove. "You called him here?" I asked my brother incredulously. "Why would you do that? I don't want to see him after everything he's done." "You need to talk to him, don't you? The wedding is tomorrow. You need to make some decisions, to confront him with what you know." "What's all this about?" says Murray with a big grin on his face as he approaches us, his eyes feasting on the champagne and the picnic basket. "This looks very romantic, Nicole," he says, coming up to me to pull me into his arms. "Hello, Cameron. This is very nice of you to do this for the both of us before our big day tomorrow." "I'll leave you both to it," says Cameron, giving me a wink. I watch him walking away through the woodgrove and wish with all my heart that he had stayed with me. "You want some champagne, do you, Murray? I'll get you some, shall I?" I move over to the bucket of champagne and pour my fiancé a glass, throwing the cold fizzy drink into his face. Murray looks at me in astonishment, and something in the woodgrove appears to be chuckling. I look around to see what that strange sound is, but I see nothing.
What the hell? What did you do that for, Nicole? What's wrong with you?
You mean you don't know? I say, the anger rising up in my chest so that my suppressed sobs come bursting out of my throat.
You want to know, do you? You want to know why I'm upset? Well, I will show you.
I thrust the pictures into his hands, and Cameron's face grows white. He glances at the photographs with a befuddled expression.
Where did you get these from? Does it matter where I got them? I don't think it matters. What matters is what they contain. That's what matters. Let me explain everything to you, Nicole. Let's talk about this. It was once off. It meant nothing.
The tears are spilling down my face, and I dart hurriedly into the woodgrove to run away from him. I don't want him to see me like this. I don't want him to see me breaking down and how much he has hurt me. But the gravity of what has happened has hit me so hard. So I just dash aimlessly into the woodgrove with Murray running after me, calling my name.
Nicole! Nicole! Hold on a minute. We need to talk. Let's talk. We need to have a word about this. I need to explain everything to you. I love you, Nicole. I'm very sorry. Please, please don't be like this. Let's talk about this.
I'm running through the woodgrove. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going. My tears have made my vision bleary and rather obscured, and my cognitive thinking is scrambled. I want to get away from my fiancé, and all I can think about is finding a suitable place to hide. But this is a game of hide-and-seek that I don't want to be playing. I'm almost tripping over the bracken and jutting rocks to get away from Murray, whom is running after me, calling my name.
Nicole, come back! Where are you going? We need to talk. Please don't be like this.
Then something inconspicuous comes bounding out of the dark, looming shadows. Something indeterminate, very black. It's thumping the ground with its ponderous feet. At first I think it's a very large black bear, standing up on its hind legs. But then I realise it's a Bigfoot, as soft shadows of revealing moonlight puddle across his rather noble-looking human face. The Bigfoot looks indignantly irked, very angry, but his focus is not on me at all. It's all directed on Murray. He's acting the way a protective dog would react if a household is being burgled and the burglar has broken into the property. This is exactly how this territorial Bigfoot is behaving, as he gives Murray chase. It would seem the capriciously belligerent Bigfoot is growling and screaming directly at Murray, as if his presence in the woodgrove is an abomination that needs to be spat out like a filthy piece of chewing gum. Murray is running backwards, his terrified eyes as round as saucers. He is panic-stricken as he fixes his gaze on the Bigfoot. He looks as if he thinks the Bigfoot is going to kill him in any minute. But I knew if that were the case, Murray would already be dead, as the Bigfoot is chasing him at a much slower pace, when he could easily have increased his pace and grabbed him with not much of a problem. Once Murray has escaped the forest, the Bigfoot returns to me. I'm not sure why I never ran away at the first opportunity that came my way, but I sensed I wasn't in trouble, and that I could trust the strange idiosyncratic creature. How I knew this, even I don't know. The Bigfoot's demeanour shifts, and as odd as it sounds, I feel as if I know him, as if I've always known him, and a childhood memory is triggered. I'm sure I'd seen him before somewhere. All 8 foot 700 pounds of his strapping muscular impression. The creature is all male, exceedingly benevolent. I have no fear in his presence. I think he must have sensed I was trying to escape my fiancé, and so on my behalf he intervened by scaring him away. And I'm not sorry he did that at all. The creature reaches out a hand to pull me to my feet. His deep-set, treacle-coloured eyes look very concerned. I know he can sense my obvious distress.
He's gone, I hear the voice in my head. He won't be coming back. I scared him away.
I look up at the Bigfoot, and I can't help but smile. You scared him, all right, I say. Why do I feel like I know you? I hear the voice in my head.
Because you know me. You might not have consciously known me, but you always knew I was here. I've been watching over you and your brother. all your lives, making sure you're safe."
I was amazed that the Bigfoot was actually communicating with me telepathically, but I felt so comforted, so reassured in his presence, and all the hurt and betrayal I felt towards Murray wilted away, as if in the great grand scheme of things, everything that had happened was for the greater good. The Bigfoot stares at me with his human face, and I hear in my head,
"Don't be sad. All is well with the world, and it always will be, and it always has been, and it always shall be."
I am escorted faithfully through the forest by the Bigfoot, touched to have met such a remarkable creature that so clearly had my back, and saw me as significantly important to his environment, like the trees in the woodgrove and the indigenous wildlife. To cut a long story short, the wedding was naturally called off, but not the celebration, where 150 guests were invited to a party just to celebrate life, and a party we certainly had, and celebrate we most certainly did. I did speak to Murray to make my peace with him. He made no mention of the Bigfoot that had chased him from the woodgrove, but admitted to me that he did have a problem with fidelity. I'm so glad my father and brother saved me from marrying him, as he is currently on wife number 3, and one of those wives with a broken marriage could so easily have been me.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I met Cynthia McKay at book club when I moved into a small rented apartment on the Oregon coast, where I'd taken up a position working for a solicitor's in an organisational role to manage the affairs and computer records in the offices. Cynthia McKay was about 83 years old and still going strong. She was self-assured, a vibrant personality, and was seated around the coffee table on a comfortable upholstered red velvety chair with the rest of the group, with her knitting in hand, discussing the book we were reading. There must have been about 25 people all in all, and the rendezvous in the local bar in town, hosted in a conference room that guests would hire, was set up in an agreeable, well-appointed sitting room, while the bar provided us with drinks and platters of sandwiches. We would meet up twice a month on a Tuesday. I had only just moved to the Oregon coast and was looking exceedingly forward to making friends and procuring a brand new exciting life for myself, laying down secure roots and hopefully solid foundations. I'd always been drawn to the ocean and was desirous to live a stone's throw away from the beach. It was something I'd always wanted since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I was originally from New York City, but Oregon had always called my name. I knew that this was where I ultimately belonged. It was rather sad to leave my family and friends behind in New York. Of course it was. But then again, I could always visit them whenever I wanted to, and they could visit me. My family never comprehended my incessant need to live by the ocean, but the longing was ingrained in me and was not something I could rationally explain. It was after a holiday to the coast here as a little girl. I had emphatically decided that when I was old enough, this is where I would ultimately live, and I told my parents as much, but they took my wild commentary with a pinch of salt, only to realise that I had meant every word of what I'd said, that this was where I would live one day. And now here I was. My apartment offered me such pleasurable benefits of enjoying extraordinary oceanfront views, but given its close proximity to the beach, it came with a high rental price tag and was rather poky and on the small side, but was all I could actually afford to rent at the time. It seemed like joining a book club was a promising, expedient way to meet new people and to get acquainted with some of the locals. Besides, I loved reading all kinds of fictional books for my personal gratification and entertainment. This was the quintessential opportunity to meet like-minded individuals like myself, whom shared a similar kindred passion. I'd always found reading far more satisfying than watching Netflix or movies on television, as reading always harnesses your imagination. There is one major drawback when it comes to reading. It can make your eyes get terribly tired and fatigued, as all that concentrating on words can be laboriously punishing. I was so impressed that this 83-year-old woman was so industriously independent, as I was to learn she lived on her own in a beautiful house overlooking the prepossessing views of the ocean. Cynthia did have a domesticated home help she hired,
who I noticed was sitting in the corner of the room, not engaging with anyone, looking like a petulant, insouciant bull terrier, as she paged through a magazine, clearly indifferent and apathetic to the rest of the group. I remember thinking she'd have been more than welcome to join the rest of us in the reading group, but she was very detached. I clandestinely suspected she looked on our reading as rather unproductive as a pastime, but I could have said the same about the magazine that she was glancing through. I mean, how productive was that? I mean, who was she to actually pass judgment on what gave us great pleasure? I didn't like the character Eve in the book, says Cynthia. I felt the author didn't portray her realistically. I mean, when her sister died, she was so nonchalant, so blasé, exceedingly perfunctory, and I'm sorry, that's not a natural reaction to have, is it? Should she have not vented some emotional frustration? Shouldn't she have brooded in her melancholia? But she got on with her life as if nothing had happened. I thought it was extremely bizarre. It did bother me. Oh, I agree with Cynthia wholeheartedly, I said. If a close family member dies, let's face it, even if you're not that close to them, it's going to hurt hard. It's going to have some kind of effect on you. But the author failed to reflect the woman's distress, making her come across as cavalier and impassively uncaring. It was like she skirted past her emotions and didn't express any sadness about her sister's demise. And that's not natural.
Maybe that is what the author was trying to convey, says George, one of the men in our group. I mean, some people are not emotional, are they? I have a friend whose mother died a month ago. That guy did not shed a tear, nor was he overwrought or distressed, even though he loved his mother very, very much. I'm in no doubt about that. I wouldn't describe him as a cold fish in any way, nor indifferent, but I would say he was very resigned.
What's that supposed to mean, George? I ask.
It means that he was accepting of the circumstances.
He pauses for a moment to reflect on his thoughts.
It's like animals. More often than not when a dog in the family dies, or even a cat. Haven't you noticed how acquiescently accepting the animals are? It's like they view death so very differently to the rest of us. They have a much more resilient, healthy approach to life. I think you could use the word philosophical to describe it. Not that you would call animals philosophical, but they're much more accepting. We could do well to learn from them. You know, I think in our society we have such a grim, pathological view of death. We see it as shamefully morbid, a taboo subject that should be brushed under the carpet, never addressed. And I think that is terribly sad.
You've made an excellent point, George, and I agree with you, says Cynthia. I think people are terribly afraid of death. It's probably the fear of the unknown. I do believe there's nothing to be feared. I'm 83 years old going strong, and I emphatically know that this isn't all there is. Otherwise, what would be the point in our existence at all? It wouldn't make any sense. We're energy beings. We live on. Even science has now proved that. But maybe in a different form. But I know we don't die. If you think of it from that perspective, what is there to actually be sad about? Because when we die, we join those that preceded us, and the ones that come behind us will join us later. In the end, we all die. And from the moment we're born, this is the one thing that we cannot escape, as it happens to the all of us. I found Cynthia to be a fascinating, very intriguing woman. I'd come here to the book club to make new friends, but I certainly hadn't anticipated or expected to connect with a woman old enough to be my great-grandmother, or at the very least my grandmother. I loved everything about her. I was drawn to her personality like a magnet. She was a robust woman for one so slender, so feminine and delicate. Her back was as straight as a pencil, and her peachy skin was weathered not by the sun, but probably by loss of elasticity that caused some jowls and furrowed lines to imprudently trespass and meander across her skin, like the pronounced lines you see on a road map. There were some light endearing creases that feathered themselves around her pale blue eyes. I thought that her crinkled, time-worn skin gave her a plethora of character, rather like a piece of antique furniture that has abided through the generations and proudly wears its history in the quaint markings that are highlighted beneath the polished veneer in the wood. Let's just say Cynthia's face to me was like a fascinating, well-worn cover on a book that had a riveting story to tell. A new book would not have been nearly as appealing. I'm not actually sure if I was subconsciously looking for a grandmother figure in my life. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. But growing up, both my grandparents on my father and my mother's side of the family were deceased. So I envied all my friends who had grandparents who would spoil them rotten and be an intricate part of their lives. I knew I was missing out, not having matriarch figures like that in my own life, like they did. My mother was quick to acknowledge this, always saying things like, "I wish your grandmother was here now. She would be so awfully proud of you, and your grandfather would be equally so." "I don't know why we connect," I say to Cynthia one day. "We're generations apart, aren't we? I feel as if I've known you all my life. Maybe I'm looking for this grandmother figure. I don't know what it is. But when I saw you at the book club, I was so drawn to you. I knew I needed to get to know you better, and I'm so glad I have. Maybe it's because you've lived. I find all your life experience so attractive. Maybe it's because you have found yourself. I think a lot of young people like me, we're still wrestling to find ourselves. I know I haven't found myself. Sometimes we're so caught up in the frenzied concerns of worrying about what other people think of us, when in reality, they probably don't think about us much at all. Then there is the constant need of social media to paint our lives in a glossy way, often for the purposes of making others envy our lot. Everyone does this when in reality these photographs have no bearing on our lives at all. It's only a snapshot of a happy moment in time, but one never posts up the sad pictures or the dark times. So let's just say people's impressions of other people's lives are deceptively false. Well, that would be true, dear. I don't have time for social media myself. It's a bit of a sensational world, where reality has been cast adrift at sea. People portraying themselves in the most favourable light. It's human nature, I suppose. It's what we do for validation and self-worth, which we all hanker after in our lives, like a hungry worm eating away at an apple from the inside out, if you think about it like that. Why do we try so hard to impress others? Isn't it such a pointless waste of time and effort? When I was your age, I had no idea who I was. I wanted to emulate people I thought was so impressive. I wanted to be someone I was not. But when you get to my age, you let all those pretenses fall away. They no longer serve your best interests. You begin to discover who you really are. And that is one of the good things about getting older. If you're looking for a grandmother figure, dear, I will happily fill the role for you. I would have liked to have been a grandmother myself, but it just wasn't to be. I couldn't have children, you know. I'm sorry, I say, pulling a sympathetic face. That really is too bad. Well, it is what it is, dear. It never bothered me, actually. I suppose me and my husband just accepted it. In those days, we didn't have the fertility treatments they have now, so you were pretty much stuck with your lot, if you couldn't carry a baby to term, that is. Do you feel you missed out? I asked Cynthia, who's pouring me some tea and passing it to me in a china cup. I'm impressed that her fingers are so steady. She doesn't even wobble, nor does a teacup tremble in her hands. I can see her domestic help, a woman called Selby Dianthus, is sitting in the corner of the room like an objectional centurion on guard duty, staring at us with gog eyes. I can tell the woman doesn't like me at all, but at least she doesn't interfere with our tea party, as her interaction would have subdued our jovial engagement. When Selby gets up to leave the room, I ask Cynthia all about her, as I cannot for the life of me understand what she's doing in Cynthia's life. She's like that odd piece of furniture in a room that just doesn't belong, and looks distinctly out of place, as it blatantly offends the harmonious flow of the decor. Who is she? I whisper to Cynthia. Why do you have her here? I notice she's always with you, hanging around you like a stray dog that's not really wanted, but you put up with her because you feel sorry for her. I get that kind of impression. Well, a while back, dear, I fell and broke my wrist. Then I was being encouraged by social workers to sell up and move to a retirement home. But I didn't want to do that. I realised getting someone to move into my house as a domestic help would keep their interfering butts out of my business. So that's why Selby Dianthus moved in. No other reason. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched all day by her hawkish eyes. But it's better than being in a retirement home any day of the week. She's an idiosyncratic creature, you know. I couldn't think of a more uninspiring job than babysitting an older woman. She does have her uses, though, I'll give her that. I mean, she drives me around in the truck, helps me with shopping, cleans and cooks, as I'm not efficient like I used to be. She's been a great help in that regard, but in truth she's a very cold fish, not very emotional. I've never warmed to her. She gives me the creeps, I say to Cynthia. There's something very dark about her. When I first saw her at the book club, sitting on the outside looking at us, all prattling away, I actually felt decidedly sorry for her, but not any more, not at all. Is it wrong to feel this about someone I barely know, to be so judgmental like this? But there's something about her that really irks me. I can't think what it is. Normally I don't have an unkind word to say about most people, but she's the exception to that rule. It's called intuition, dear, whispers Cynthia. I know exactly what you mean. She's an oddball. Like you say, there's something off about her. But if she's happy to be paid for watching me all day long, I'm all right with that. Anything to avoid the perils of an old age home. Believe me, when you get to my age, the pressure for you to move away from your home, from outside sources, becomes immense. People worry about you, that you're not going to manage on your own, you're not going to cope, you're going to fall down the staircase. But when they know someone is living with you, managing your affairs, they shut up and stop poking their noses in your business. They may be well-meaning, but I love my independence, and I'm not quick to give that up. Unless, of course, I really am immobile, and then I will have to change my mind about things. Well, I guess it makes me feel a lot better that you're not alone, Cynthia. I mean, you are getting older, so it's a relief to know if you fall or something that Selby will be to the rescue. But I do get why you live here. You should never be bullied to leave your home. That's entirely your decision. And you're perfectly capable of making those decisions on your own. I mean, if I was your age, I wouldn't want to leave this place either, unless I had to, unless I was completely immobile. Your house is so dreamy, and those ocean views are spectacular. That's why I love it here, says Cynthia, rolling her hands together appreciatively. Sometimes I sit out there on the couch, looking out to sea with my telescope, watching everything outside. I remember when I first bought this house, it was love at first sight. I knew I had to have it. I persuaded my husband to buy it. We never looked back after that. We were so happy here. Sadly, my husband died 5 years ago. Renal failure it was. It was very lonely without him, but the sea views and this house pulled me through. And every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd take a long walk out on the beach, and a peace would come over me. It was as if my husband was walking with me. I almost felt his presence. It was so wonderful. Maybe he was, I say. You don't know. And I imagine the walks must have been so restorative to your soul. Then there's your house, with its incredibly engaging views, where you can watch the boats bobbing out on the ocean there. It would be pretty difficult to be sad here for very long. I love your house's classic timeless design. It's the kind of house that can sail through the generations and never actually look out of place. And the interiors are spectacular. The high ceilings, the marble fireplaces, the chandeliers, the sweeping staircase, not to mention the floor-to-ceiling windows on your amazing patio areas. For a woman in your 80s, your house is, how can I say, well, very in vogue. It's not dated at all, not even your furnishings, but then that's the classic stuff for you, isn't it? Rather like classical music. It just doesn't date. Good point, Skye. I do try to keep my decor current, but classic, and over the years me and my husband did alterations to the place to maximise the sea views. When I first moved here, there was no houses around for many miles. It was wonderful. It was like we had the beach entirely to ourselves. Mind you, we could never swim. The water was freezing cold. But every morning I would have long walks on the beach, and boy, did I love it. I was glad to see that Selby was in the kitchen preparing Cynthia's evening dinner, and not eavesdropping on our conversation, but I could hear her clanking around very loudly with the pots and pans. She was not very quiet. It was almost like she wanted to be heard, as if she was making us fully aware of how hard she was actually working. That's another good thing about having her here. whispers Cynthia. She keeps the house nice and clean. And she's not a bad cook either. She's been cooking Haitian dishes recently, like Haitian chicken fritters, grigot, which is baked pork shoulder, and pen patate, which is a sweet potato pudding. And they are very tasty, although in truth I prefer more traditional classical southern food. But it's like Selby seems to have adopted this Creole culture, which is peculiarly bizarre. It's almost like she's shunned and disengaged her own southern roots, as if she thinks they're not colourful enough for her. She's got strange African-American Haitian friends whom she spends all her spare time with. Goodness knows why she mixes with them. I don't know what the attraction is. Sometimes they spend time in her bedroom playing loud music together. I don't know what they get up to when they get together, but after they've been here, the house feels so much darker from their presence. I met the one. His eyes were as black as coal. Scared the hell out of me, they did. So now when they come into the house, I always avoid eye contact with them. I hate it when they're here. It feels as if they've impertinently intruded and invaded upon my space. The two men, they're so tall, very big. They wear their hair in hundreds of these shoulder-length braids. And there's something menacing about them, but I can't quite think what it is. It's probably because you don't identify with the Haitian culture. It can be exceedingly intimidating when you meet people from a different culture, so different to our own that you don't understand. I heard once when the Queen of England went to New Zealand, the New Zealand rugby team did the haka dance for her. It freaked her out. It scared her so much. Well, that's what I heard. The dance is designed to be intimidating to competitors. You're probably right, dear, says Cynthia. When people come from different parts of the world and engage in different religious practices and have different perspectives, it's hard to relate to them. I defy anyone to even suggest it's about skin colour. It's not about race at all. Of course you know what the elites would do. They'd turn it around on us to make it seem as if it's all about race, so they can bring discord between us. Part of their manipulative agenda, I suspect. But it's all about culture, and those differences can be so incredibly profound. That's why it's enigmatic to me that a young southern girl like Selby would be so entwined with these tall Haitian men. It's Ricardo that's the big problem. He's the one that gives me the heebie-jeebies. He's got soulless eyes. The other one, Daniel, is not so bad, but then again he never smiles. They both look so intense all the time, as if their minds are otherwise engaged. They speak Creole and French, but their pidgin English is not that good, and they're so unfriendly. You see that necklace over there? She says, pointing to this long leather necklace that is covered in strange-shaped wooden amulets made from Malayan wood and beads that are hanging on her wall and look very out of place next to some rather striking pieces of contemporary art. Oh, yes, I did wonder what that was. It looks rather curious. It's called a criss-criss, says Cynthia. Selby gave it to me. It's a Haitian lucky charm, I believe, from voodoo. It's supposed to ward off evil, to bring you good luck. Well, the wearer good luck, that is. Selby wanted me to wear it, but I appeased her by putting it on the wall. I find the thing hideously grotesque, very ugly, but I don't tell her that. She meant well giving it to me, bless her heart, but I think it's the ugliest necklace I have ever seen. I look at Cynthia aghast. You mean that's a lucky amulet connected to voodoo? I don't like the sound of that. Doesn't that disturb you? I mean, do you think Selby could be engaged with those practices? Nothing would surprise me with her, dear. Selby is very unorthodox. 2 years later, it was early in the morning when my cell phone rang. It was Selby. I'd never received a phone call from the objectionable woman a day in my life, and I didn't want to start hearing from her now. Seeing her name on my caller ID was more than a little unsettling for me, for there was no love lost between the two of us. My first thought that came into my mind was, she's phoning about Cynthia. Is Cynthia all right? Hello, Sky. It's Selby here. I wouldn't bother coming around to visit Cynthia anymore, if I were you. She's not here. What? Is she all right? I ask. No, she's not. That's why I'm phoning you, Sky. Her spirit has left the earthly domain. You mean she's dead? What do you think I mean, Sky? Her spirit has left the earthly domain and is negotiating the hereafter. How did it happen, I say, unable to restrain the tears that are bursting through my eyelids and trailing down my cheeks. I knew that Selby was weird, but the way she was talking was exceedingly bizarre. "How do you think it happened?" came Selby's condescending, irritated voice, as if my question was the most stupid question she had ever heard. "I told you, her spirit left her body. There's nothing complicated about that. Do you know nothing about dying, Skye? Are you that naive?" "I'm not asking you that, Selby," I say obsequiously. "I just wish you'd speak more simply. I mean, how did she die? Did she die in her sleep? Did she have a fall, an accident? Was it a peaceful death? I need to know she didn't suffer." "She died at her appointed time, Skye. I found her in bed this morning. She looked very comfortable. Of course she didn't suffer. She wasn't sick, was she? Nor did she have a fall. Her exit from this earthly domain was smooth. Now I need to go. I just thought you needed to be informed. I'll let you know about the funeral arrangements." "Thank you, Selby. I'll appreciate that. I just want to say I'm very sorry for your loss." "What loss?" says Selby, confounded. "The woman's moved on to another realm. She's not dead." 5 months later, I couldn't believe that I'd moved into Cynthia's old house. It was beautiful. I'd never dream of selling it, not only because it was magnificent, but because I could feel Cynthia's presence in her home, and it helped me to feel connected to her. I missed the old woman so very much. I was baffled she'd left her house to me, but it turned out she had no surviving family members. Of course, the news that Selby had not received anything in the inheritance had gone down like a lead balloon when she discovered that Cynthia had left everything to me. She had stormed into my inherited house, screaming the riot act at me, without even bothering to knock. I made sure I changed the locks after her unexpected, very unwelcome visit. "Who do you think you are?" she spouted. "Cynthia was going to leave this house to me, and you surreptitiously manipulated her to change her will, didn't you? How did you do it, you little vixen? I might have known you had ulterior motives in getting to know Cynthia. You conspired against me to steal her house right under my nose from me. She left everything to you, and she left me a piddling $50,000 after everything I did for her. I cooked and I cleaned for her. I took her driving and shopping. I watched over her like a hawk, and this is the thanks I get. Ricardo said you couldn't be trusted. The moment he saw you getting all cosy with Cynthia, he said you needed watching. Ricardo's always right. I should have listened to him." "You misunderstand everything, Selby. Cynthia was a great friend to me. I may not have known her for very long, but we became very close in that short period of time. We had a special connection, and I'm sorry you feel hard done by. I assure you there was no conspiracy. I'm surprised as you are, that she left everything to me. I would have thought she might have had some remote family member who would have received her inheritance. I certainly didn't expect to be the recipient of her will. I'm honoured she left everything to me. Over the last couple of years, she has become a grandmother figure to me, and my very best friend. I'm going to miss her terribly. I feel as if a huge presence has left my life. Losing her is one of the hardest losses in my life. I know she was grateful to you, Selby, for everything you did. She told me about your Creole cooking, and how you kept the place lovely and clean. I could see that myself. The house was always spotless." Selby scoffed. "Like I believe that for a second. All this mumbo-jumbo you're spouting. You were always after Cynthia's money, weren't you, all along? I should have smelt a rat from the very beginning, acting so buddy-buddy with her, when all along you just wanted her money." "I did want something from Cynthia, Selby. You're absolutely right about that. But it's not what you think. I wanted her friendship, but her home and her money. No, I didn't give those things a wavering or a fleeting thought. I would never have expected her to leave me all this. No one was more surprised than I was." "Liar, liar," says Selby, hissing at me like a snake. "I'll tell you something for nothing. You'll rue the day, Skye, that you ever met Cynthia. And I'll make sure you pay a big price for stealing my inheritance from under my nose. This house was supposed to be mine. Oh, by the way, can I have the necklace that was hanging on the wall over there? The one I gave Cynthia. I want it back. I'm certainly not going to let you keep it. Of course, I say. I'll go and get it for you. I was so glad I'd actually kept it. I'd been very eager to throw the ghastly thing out, but something made me keep it. I suppose I thought that throwing something lucky away was possibly not a good idea, even if it was exceedingly ugly. I handed it back to her. Here it is, I say. She grabs it from me, running her fingers over the beads and the string-shaped wooden charms. I gave this to Cynthia, you know. It protected her, although why I bothered after her duplicity, selling me short on that will of hers, I honestly don't know. You know what this is, do you, Skye? She asks me, giving me a wide, smirkish grin. It was the first time I'd ever seen Selby actually smile, but the grin she gave me was not the kind variety. It was a smile that masked an insidious malevolence that made my skin crawl and the hair on the back of my neck stand up on end. And in that moment I had an overwhelming sense that Selby would love to extract some kind of revenge on me, as she felt I'd stolen her inheritance, and a sense of foreboding loomed over my heart like a dark shadow. Yes, I do. Cynthia told me it's a criss-criss, some kind of Haitian lucky charm. Very interesting piece of jewellery, I must confess. That's right, it's a criss-criss. Believe me, you're going to miss it not being around you, Skye says, with a wicked glint in her eye. Well, I'll be off now. I do hope you enjoy wallowing in your ill-gotten gains, Skye. As it always comes at a price, believe me, I know. She straightens her back. Right, I'm going now, she says, clutching the criss-criss in her hands so tightly that her white knuckles begin to show. Goodbye, Selby. I wish you all the best in your life, I say. I'll see you out. I am sad you feel so put out about the will. I say this as I escort her to the front door. You're sorry, she says, glaring at me. Please, Skye, like I believe that. If you were truly sorry, you'd hand the house and the money over to me, wouldn't you? You'd do the right thing. But no, you're keeping every last penny to yourself, aren't you? You'll pay big time for your greed. You're going to need to watch your back. Selby swaggers over to her truck with an indignant inebriation, not brought on by alcohol, but by the intoxication of her fury. It is in that poignant moment that I see there are two obscure figures waiting in the truck for her. One is seated in the driver's seat. He climbs out of the driver's seat to open the passenger side door for Selby to get into the car, while the other man is seated in the back. It was Ricardo who opens the door for her. He's so tall, so large, wearing a white cotton shirt and a criss-criss around his neck, but a much simpler one than Selby gave Cynthia. It's got a couple of rhino horn-shaped miniature amulets attached to it. He glances in my direction, his soulless, devilish eyes as black as coal. They send shivers of trepidation running down my spine, and uneasy butterflies flapping around my stomach. He gives me the coldest, most contemptuous look, and then his malignant pupils went from jet black to completely white. It was the most sinister thing that I have ever seen. He then looked directly at me. He laughed a hideous laugh that didn't even sound remotely human. I felt a sense of disquiet as they drove away, and I had this baleful prognostication come over me that spoke to my gut, a warning bell that sounded in my intuition. This is not the last that you've seen of Selby Dianthus. And I knew that my feeling was absolutely right. I was most aggrieved and affronted that Selby had such a dim, shallow view of me, and no comprehension of the genuinely close relationship I had had with Cynthia over the last couple of years. She looked on my relationship with Cynthia as superficial, insincere, frivolous and glib, when the reverse was actually true. I suppose you could say that Selby was not exactly perceptive. Granted, I'd never even remotely warmed to her, neither had Cynthia for that matter. It seemed audaciously presumptuous of her that she believed Cynthia should have left her everything in her will. I'd never even considered that I'd get a penny from Cynthia, and I didn't want one either. But I was not going to throw away the incredible gift Cynthia had so graciously bestowed upon me. I knew I was very blessed, remarkably privileged, and most fortunate to be the recipient of her sizable inheritance. In the beginning, I'd almost been hesitantly reluctant to become her friend, knowing too well that the woeful, fortuitous day would ultimately arrive when I'd have to say goodbye to her, and that was something I'd seriously dreaded. I was glad that Cynthia had been able to live out her days in her favourite home, so that in itself was a remarkable blessing. I knew a younger friend would not have exposed me to such a lamentable scenario, as she would more than likely still be in life. I couldn't help the fact that I was drawn to Cynthia, like iron filings to a magnet, and despite the fact that our friendship was far too short, it had made an indelible impression on my life, and I knew I would never ever forget her. I was 25 years old, but I was wearing the maturity of one much older than myself. As Cynthia's wisdom had rubbed off on me exponentially, it had powerfully influenced and persuaded my outlook on life in such a positive, imperishable, enduring way. I no longer felt the unabating need to keep up with the Joneses by splashing my social media pages with pictures of me sipping champagne in places like Paris, or going on a fancy yacht trip on the Mediterranean. Not that I would have done either of those glamorous things anyway, but I might have posted a polished, sophisticated page of myself looking rather dapper, as if surrounded by glitzy glamour, in order to validate my sense of self-importance, as if to say to all my friends, "Hey there, look at me! I'm really someone quite significant, you know." All that frivolous stuff was illogically meaningless to me now, but there was a time I would have lapped it all up, rather like a cat with a saucer of milk. But no, not any more. So much had changed, I had changed, and I was beginning to like the new me. I had become increasingly more confident and self-assured. Cynthia had helped me to see through the freckless transparency of it all. I would regularly visit her gravesite to talk to her, lay down fresh flowers. It was a point of contact for me that made me feel incredibly close to my beloved friend. I had learnt from the solicitor that Selby had persuaded her to leave everything to her, but when I came into Cynthia's life, she had changed her will, unbeknown to me, describing me to her solicitor as the grandchild she never had. "I'm so pleased," she told him. "I was going to leave my house to a perfect stranger that I don't particularly even like, who's a complete oddball to me. Now I'm leaving my home to my very best friend, and I couldn't be happier about that." I had offloaded a lot of stuff of Cynthia's, like clothes and other knickknacks that I didn't want, and given them to a charity shop. I also succeeded in making my sumptuous living space all my own, with painted interiors, new kitchen fittings and more modern granite countertops, and some comfortable, fashionable classic furnishings. One thing that remained forever unchanged was the spectacular views from the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the panoramic views of the spectacular coast, where the shimmering blue ocean under the morning sun would twinkle brightly through the windows of my home, welcoming in a brand new day. I considered myself enormously lucky to be the proud owner of this classic-style property, with its Italianite influences and excellent ornate architecture. The imposing white house was comfortably nestled on solid foundations of a rather stout rocky outcrop that rose up on a high elevation and was thickly iced by a smooth, levelled-out plateau of lush, viridescent evergreen lawn, like what you'd expect to find on a golfing green. The yard was liberally scattered with the tall, masterful lineations of the dogwoods, the cottonwoods, the oak and willow trees that protected it from the obstreperous north winds. Those blustering, uncongenial, punnelling windstorms could sometimes get quite frisky, wreaking havoc on the plants or anything not tethered to the ground by superglue, but the trees provided a fabulous windbreak. There were beds filled with azaleas, lilies, Mexican sage, shrubs, heathers, lavenders, pansies, and ornamental cabbages, so the yard looked spectacular all year round, and a gardening service took care of the maintenance twice a week, which made my life all the more easy. I would return home every day from my job in town, where I worked for a local solicitor's, managing the affairs in the office, dealing with clients on the phone, and so forth. I would come home in the late afternoon and walk happily down the metal staircase from my lawn that weaved its way down the rocky incline to the ribbon of yellow beach below. I thoroughly enjoyed taking an exhilarating leisurely stroll down the golden beach, with the wind blowing against my hair, I loved watching the ocean waves crashing against the jutting rocks, feathering them with a white foamy discharge. I could hear the cries of seagulls soaring above my head, and see the distant shapes of boats framing the horizon under the shadowy glaze of the late afternoon sun. I could taste the salt on my tongue, drink in the vibrant fresh air. It was always so beautiful, and the best feeling of all was the feeling of my toes rubbing against the sand, and the rolling water drenching them with ice-cold nudges. One day, after enjoying a brief leisurely stroll on the beach, I returned home. Something felt different about my place, almost as if in my brief absence someone had been here, as the tranquillity seemed disrupted and oddly different. The energy was significantly darker, as if the light atmosphere had been vanquished. Nothing was actually out of place, but I had the sense that my environment had definitely been disturbed. I did find a single flower from my flower arrangement on the hall table, lying in the middle of the floor. How did it get from the vase on the table to the middle of the floor like this? It hadn't been like that before. That was one little incongruous thing that left me feeling on edge. My thoughts turned to Selby and her two formidable Haitian friends. I wondered if they'd been in my house. The thought gave me the creeps, as I reflected how Ricardo had looked at me through his dark eyes that had become as white as snow, and I clandestinely wondered if the intimidating man was actually possessed. I was sure they were deeply entrenched in voodoo. That night, as I prepared myself some pasta, I sat down to watch some television, and finally retreated to my bedroom. And I could not shake off the disturbing feeling that I was being watched. It was like in the corner of my eyes I would always see a strange light, but I'd turn around only to see nothing there at all. I told myself, meeting Selby, her unkind accusations she had unleashed upon me so gracelessly, and the presence of her peculiar unorthodox Haitian friends, had somehow played a teasing, suggestive game with my imagination. These creeping feelings had seized my engagement so ruthlessly, were only an unfortunate consequence of that meeting with the objectionable woman. I was reading too much into it, seeing things that weren't really there, that were creatively feeding my imagination, like a frenzied school of piranhas, and I was biting the bait. Yet despite everything, this unsettling feeling that someone had interfered in my space while I was away, and the odd anomaly of the lone flower lying in the middle of the passage, left me feeling unhinged. I chastised myself for being so impressionable, and returned to bed with a heavy heart. The fatigue of a long drawn-out day with the demands of a hectic schedule at the office had worn me to a frazzle, so I gratefully sank into my bed, pulling the sheets over me, and drifted off into a deep sleep, only to be awoken with my bed being shaken very wildly. I opened my eyes in a panic. My whole body trembles under the vibration of my bed. I look up to discover that my sliding doors from the bedroom that lead out onto the private patio are wide open, and an icy cold wind is blowing through the room. My bed is shaking violently, but then it suddenly stops. I climb out of my bed to close the sliding doors behind me, knowing full well that I secured them before I went to bed. I begin to doubt myself, which I know is part of human nature. I think maybe I didn't secure them after all. But that didn't explain why my whole bed had been violently shaking like that. But the following morning when I woke up, I began to wonder if the shaking bed and the open patio door had been all but a dream. Of course it was a dream, I told myself, my mind desperately looking for a reasonable explanation to make sense of these idiosyncrasies. Over the next few weeks, strange, rather curious things begin to happen in my home, but it's all very subtle. I couldn't explain or rationalize these things, but believe me, I tried. One is always looking for sound reasoning to explain life's little oddities, like keys that should be found hanging on the hook, now found lying in the bathtub, or a slipper found in the oven, or even fresh food now in the freezer when it should have been in the refrigerator, and I was certain I'd put it there. I kept telling myself I was overtired from the demands of my job, becoming increasingly absent-minded. One thing that happened day after day was a single lone flower from the vase on the hall table would always be found lying on the floor in the entrance hall when I returned home. When I told my friend at work about it, she said, "It's probably your friend from the other side, getting your attention, leaving you a sign that she's still around, playing games with you. She's watching over you, that's all." "You think so?" I said. "Absolutely," said my friend with a passionate conviction. "I mean, Cynthia was a grandmother figure in your life, was she not? When people die, they often try to reach out to us, let us know they're around. After my dad passed away, a balloon floated into my bedroom. My dad loved balloons. Stuff like that doesn't randomly just happen. It's a sign. It's a sign that you're hearing from your friend." I wanted desperately to believe my friend was right, and that Cynthia was reaching out to me from beyond the grave, to let me know she was still around. But then, if that really were the case, why did the energy in my house feel increasingly heavy? And there was a darkness I'd never felt before. Cynthia had a light, cheerful energy, an ebullience to her personality. But my house was not feeling her lightness. No, it was feeling heavy. Let's just say strange anomalies continued to appear in my home. They were so ambiguously elusive and indistinct that I was forever reassuring myself that my imagination was just in overdrive. Yet I continued to see an odd light in my peripheral vision that always seemed to dodge my attention when I turned around directly to look at it. Things were forever being misplaced in my home, and then replaced in the most outlandish, inscrutable places where I'd never have put them. One day I returned, and was unable to get into my front door. I turned the key in the lock, but it refused to respond, as if something was on the other side, barricading it, barring me from actually entering my own home. I tried a couple more times, and then the door opened, but it was peculiarly odd. Then one week things took a turn for the worst, as if the weather had changed from overcast to stormy in my home. It first happened one night when I was sitting in front of the television set, watching a comedy. I was gravitating towards watching comedies more than ever before, as they seemed to lift the heavy ambience of my home, that of late had become all-consuming to me. I kept these private, dispiriting thoughts to myself, lest people should think I was going crazy. One day as I was watching television, this black mass started to develop in the corner of my living room, like a thick, dense, cloying mist. But whatever it was so incredibly evil. I knew it was watching me. Then it just vanished from my sight. I think it was now making its presence known to me, which at least made me poignantly aware that something was definitely going on in my home, and I wasn't going mad after all. My feathers were ruffled, my nerves were on edge, every single part of me was trembling. I quickly grabbed my keys and a torch and dashed across my lawn, down the meandering metal steps towards the beach. I was out of breath, not from being unfit, but from being scared out of my wits. I'd never taken a walk on the beach at night before, but the beach was a place I could find some soulful perspective, where I could steady my tumultuous thoughts and gain a sense of peace. I always found the crashing sound of the waves thrusting themselves obstreperously against the rocks incredibly comforting, very reassuring. I needed to surround myself with their tranquility that they offered me so generously, now more than ever. It was such a blissfully beautiful night. It was hard to believe something so offensively ugly could have interfered so rudely in the living room of my home, given the sparkling beauty of such a beguiling evening. For a moment the prepossessing tranquillity of my beach walk cleared away the cluttered chaos of my tenebrous thoughts, and for a short while my mind was actually calmed. The stars in the velvety canopy were as bright as diamonds, while a full moon gleamed through the night like a lighthouse, casting her ethereal shadows over the water. I could see the stars and the moon were elegantly reflected over the twinkling surface of the water, while it steadily rolled forwards towards the shoreline, in billowing waves that caressed the beach in a trail of lacy, bubbling froth. I took off my sandals, carrying them in my hand, allowing the golden sand to rub against my feet, as I walked up and down the beach, while enjoying a cool breeze kissing my cheeks. The weather was pleasantly warm. Finally I sat down on the soft mounds of beach sand and stared out at the glittering water of the ocean. It was then that I see this ambiguous, tenebrous form moving down the beach towards me. My first thought is, what the hell is that? Let's just say after encountering the spine-chilling black mass in my living room, I wondered in horror if it had surreptitiously followed me down to the beach. The thing moving towards me was dense, solid, thick, heavy and black. I sat there, my eyes transfixed. I didn't move, nor did I run away. I just stared and stared, trying to focus on what I was actually seeing, as I could make no sense of it at all. I think my fear was hijacked by an inquisitive curiosity, as what was moving towards me was most certainly not the black mass I'd witnessed in the living room. Granted, it was black, every bit as intimidating, obscure, and definitely big. But the energy was different. It was light, airy, benevolent. To my amazement, the figure is waving at me and trying to get my attention, and then it's only standing a few feet away from me. I shine my torch on this curious anomaly, and the creature waves its hand, as if to say, "Please don't do that." I knew it found the bright light of my torch disturbing and obtrusive. I think the creature had night vision. He had the yellow eye shine you often see in bears. To my amazement, the creature sinks into the sea sand, not too far from me, and in the light of the full moon, casting its revelatory shadows over the creature, I know at once what it is. I'm astounded. Indeed, there are no words to describe the level of confoundment I actually feel. I'm sitting 2 feet away from the Bigfoot. I can hear the rise and fall of his chest. I can smell the saltiness in his long, flowing dark hair, and most of all observe the humanness of his face. I think it was this creature's noble face that bewildered me the most. I realized this Bigfoot was so much more human than I would have ever deemed possible. I was always under the distinct impression that a Bigfoot would have powerful primate influences, but this creature, beyond his cone-shaped head and the Herculean robust proportions of his body, along with his dark swaying hair that swathed his sizable contours, he was exceedingly human in every single regard. Yet beyond that there was a conspicuous intelligence to him, beyond that of the humankind, almost as if this creature had a great spiritual awareness and understanding. The creature is looking directly at me, with an earnestness that demands my attention. He's pointing to my white house on top of the rocky outcrop, that from this position on the beach looks like a little matchbox perched on top of a huge rock. "Dark energy. Dark, dark, evil energy," he says. He points directly at me. "You are in grave, grave danger." He then hands me a rock. I hold it in my hands. It looks pretty ordinary to me. "Keep the rock. It'll keep you safe." "Thank you," I say. The creature nods. He turns around, pointing directly at my house on the rock. "Get help. You need it." I watch him gliding away. I'm now thinking I must be going stark raving mad. That Bigfoot actually spoke to me in my mind. I glance down at the unassuming, very ordinary little rock in my hand. It feels unusually warm to the touch, and makes me feel calm. Rocks are normally cold to the touch, unless they've been heated by a very hot sun. This rock feels as if it's been heated. But the evening is warm, not hot. So why is this rock uncharacteristically hot? Did that really happen? Did a Bigfoot really tell me that there's evil in my home, and I need to get help? What were the chances that a creature from the pages of pulp fiction that I didn't even believe existed until now had made its appearance known to me, had reached out to me to warn me about the danger I was in? I knew in my gut that by nature these creatures were reticently evasive and enjoyed keeping themselves to themselves. But this unorthodox creature, sensing the trouble I was in, had clearly stepped out of his comfort zone to give me some sagacious advice. I unequivocally believed he was right, and decided that in the morning I would do just that, call for help. Little did I know that the night that lay ahead of me would offer me an unsavoury platter that would not be easy to digest, and I was about to have a night of horror that I would not wish on a living soul. I clutch the river stone in my hands, eagerly returning home, and I drink a warm hot chocolate made with whole milk. Then I settle down for the night, wisely putting the riverstone on my nightstand so it's easily accessible to me. The warm milk helps me to quickly drift off to sleep. I am awoken to the sound of whispering all over my bedroom. I sit up with a start. I get the profound sense that I'm not alone, but that my room is filled with an audience of spectators, and that my bed is the stage, that I am the entertainment. The whispering I hear sounds like a plethora of people talking negatively about me, and whatever they have to say about me, it's not nice at all, like a bunch of bullies on the school playground conspiring against you. It felt very personal. Then I see it rising from the corner of my bedroom, the same black, thick, dense cloud of smoke I'd seen earlier in the evening, but this time it's thicker, blacker, and bigger than ever before. It releases a dreadful stench all over my bedroom that smells of death and decay. I feel as if I'm about to throw up. I want to scream, cry out. Every part of my body recoils in terror. This thing starts to take on a human-like form, but one that is so gruesome, so distorted, so hideously ugly. There are no words to describe it to you, but I will tell you this. This thing was drenched up from the bowels of the earth, regurgitated from the realms of hell itself. It bounds onto my bed. Its heaving, robust, heavy form plunders my bed covers with a forceful thrust. And then he's on top of me. His face is steaming above me, as all the smoke rises out of him, and his incandescent eyes are like burning hot coals of red fire. His nostrils are flaring. I can hear the haunting whispers in the bedroom, becoming inflamed with excitability, as if the audience of spectators watching me is thrilled by what they are seeing. I can hear their vindictive chuckles. I have never seen such a treacherous hatred as I saw in the eyes blazing above me. I knew this thing wanted to kill me, but worse than kill me, he wanted to steal my soul. He is grinning at me with yellow mangled teeth caked in blood, a malevolent grin. He's rejoicing in my fear, as if my terror is absolutely delicious. He then begins to throttle my neck with his hands, and I try desperately to fight back, but I can't. He's shaking me so violently. I know I'm going to die. My life flashes before me. I can barely breathe, as the stranglehold of his grip around my neck gets tighter and tighter and tighter. I instinctively reach out to my nightstand and grab the riverstone, thrashing it at this creature. I see fear in his eyes when he sees the riverstone. The stone seems to become a bright yellow colour. He shrinks back, and this time his face reflects terror. As he retreats, his red furious eyes fixed on the riverstone. There is a whirling sound, and then all these vertical ridges of black smoke rise up out of the floor, and then they vanish before my very eyes. I look down at the riverstone in my hand. It's now gone back to its original colour. It's very hot. Whatever the Bigfoot had given me, it scared the hideous demonical entity away. But I couldn't get to sleep for the rest of the night, and left my house to sleep in the truck, where I kept my riverstone safely by my side. Clarissa's account. I received a phone call from a very distressed woman called Skye, claiming I needed to come at once, as there was a demonical entity in her home. I am an intuitive with psychic abilities, and the moment I received her call, I sensed that the woman I was speaking to was in perilously grave danger, so I immediately phoned up Father Terence Penrose to inform him that he needed to drop everything at once to help this woman, who was in grievous trouble. We needed plenty of holy water, lots and lots of it. "What do you think is going on with her?" asks Father Penrose. "I don't know, Father, but the moment she phoned me I got this awful, baleful sense of foreboding. There's something demonical in her house, hell-bent on killing her. But this thing, whatever it is, it wants more than her. It wants her soul. That's what it's after." "I'll be right over. I'm on my way." When me and Father Penrose arrived at Skye's house, the woman was in a dreadful state. She was an attractive woman in her 20s with long dark hair that bounced on her shoulders and green eyes that looked saturated with terror. I have seen that look on many haunted clans before, and I could sense the relief my presence actually brought her. I noticed she was holding a riverstone in her hand. Her knuckles were white, Whatever this thing was that she was holding, it seemed to give off a powerful white energy. I knew I would question her about it later. There was something very special about that riverstone. It isn't normal for me to see energy from an inanimate object like a stone. I'm so glad you've come, she told me. I don't think I could sleep in this house another night if you hadn't come along. Something evil is going on in my house, and last night it tried to kill me. At first it was this thick black mass that morphed into this hideous being. It climbed on my bed and began to strangle me. This thing had glowing eyes. They were red, and the ugliest face I'd ever seen. It was filled with such hatred for me. It wanted me dead. I could feel other entities in the room. They'd come to watch. They were actually laughing and jeering at me. It was like they were entertained by my fear, getting almost inebriated on it. I didn't like what Skye was telling me, but even before I entered her house, I could feel the dark, bodeful energy. I'm just going to walk around your house, I say. I need to get a sense of things. I noticed that most of the dark energy was coming from one of the bedrooms in the house that looked to me to be just an insignificant spare room for a guest. But this room was otherwise occupied by this evil presence that did not want me there. It was screaming at me, "Get out of my way! I have a job to do. I'm the soul collector. We've come to get her soul. Get out of my way. I have a right to be here. I was called. You cannot send me away. Not until I've got the soul I've come to collect." I move around the room, and I bend my head under the bed, where I'm sensing is the source of the very dark energy. Then I see it, an arrangement of voodoo regalia. I immediately leave the arrangement, but instinctively pull out a voodoo doll that has been plundered with all kinds of pins very viciously. I knew what this doll was. The doll represented Skye. Someone wanted to kill her, and were using black magic to attain their goal. They had called up this evil entity. I phoned up a Haitian friend of mine. "I've got a problem," I tell him, giving him Skye's address. "Drop everything you're doing right now. I need your help." "Right, I'll be with you in a sec." I returned to Skye's kitchen, carrying the voodoo doll in my hand. Father Terence is talking with Skye intently, trying to reassure the discomposed woman, who is pumped up with adrenaline and is decidedly on edge. "It wants to kill me," she keeps repeating over and over again. "It wants to kill me. It wants to kill me." The tears spill down her cheeks. "What did you pick up?" asks Father Penrose, looking at me with concern. "I perceive a very dark energy. It's been harassing me since I entered the house, but thankfully I fasted yesterday, so I'm feeling on jolly good form." Skye's eyes drop down on the voodoo doll that I'm holding in my hands. "What's that?" she asks, looking perturbed. "I found this voodoo doll in one of the spare rooms in your house." "Which one?" asks Skye. "The room with the rather attractive blue bed covers." Skye throws a shocked hand over her face. "That was where Selby slept when she lived here, before Cynthia died." "Do you think this woman had reason to want to harm you?" I ask. "Well, she did say nasty things to me. She was very unhappy Cynthia left her house to me, and not to her." "Could she have hated you enough to want to kill you?" "Oh, I'm not sure. She's really weird. She hangs around with these Haitian men that I didn't like at all. One of them looked possessed. One time he looked at me, and his eyes went white. They were terrifying. Tell me, do you think Selby was engaged in voodoo at all?" "Oh, yes. She even gave Cynthia a criss-criss once. You know, a lucky amulet, I'm told. She removed it when she came to the house, when she complained about my acquiring Cynthia's inheritance. She was furious about that. She did threaten me. This is a voodoo doll that I'm holding. These pins have been strategically placed in all the chakras. This girl Selby has conjured up a demon to kill you. She wants you dead. The voodoo doll is representative of you." "That demon I saw last night definitely wanted me dead," says Skye, looking at me in horror. "That's right, he did." "Is there any way we can get rid of it?" "Yes, of course we can. I've called over a Haitian friend of mine who knows how to reverse voodoo spells. I've worked with him before. He should be here in any moment." My Haitian friend arrived within minutes. I'm glad to say he has helped me on so many occasions with this daunting world of black magic that can conjure up all kinds of things beyond one's understanding using the power of voodoo spells. He slipped into Selby's old bedroom, took the voodoo doll from me, and surreptitiously performed his magic. He then came out of the room, nodded at me, and told me it was done, and then he was gone. Now it was our job to bless the house and command the demonic entity to leave. Back to Skye. What can I say? I was heartily relieved to finally have Clarissa in my house. She was a young woman, older than me, possibly in her 30s. She had an audaciously determined look in her eyes that gave me the confidence to know that she was hell-bent on getting rid of this demonic entity that she believed wanted me dead. She arrived at my house with a man of the cloth. I was surprised she didn't even doubt that I had an evil entity in my home. From one phone call, she had sensed I was in trouble and had dropped everything on my account. I noticed the father did not like the energy in my home at all. He described it as clawing around him, trying to push him out of the house, as if it didn't want him there. I liked the father. He was also resolutely determined. He was not going to be intimidated by anything dark. He was to tell me after the event he'd felt something punching him in the back. I observed him grimacing and bending over, but I had no idea that the poor man was being physically attacked by the evil entity. When Clarissa came into the kitchen, she was carrying a strange voodoo doll in her hands that was punctured with needles in strategic points that she claimed were body meridians. I noticed she was wearing a sombre, subdued expression on her face that told me categorically that whatever was in my home was exceedingly dark and dangerous, and definitely not a ghost, but a demonical entity. When she informed me that the voodoo spell had been cast on me, I knew Selby and her Haitian friends were behind all of this, but I was gobsmacked that they actually wanted me dead. I couldn't believe there were people on this earth, filled with such a vengeful hatred, they wanted to do something like this to another human being. But then you learn something new every day. Perhaps I was just terribly naive. I do remember the first time I met Selby, and she watched me and Cynthia talking in the living room. There was something so dark about her. I believe she's been dabbling not only with the Haitian culture, but also with the dark side of voodoo. This was absolutely confirmed when Clarissa called a Haitian friend around, who arrived on the scene to dismantle the voodoo spell. It was fortunate that this one could actually be undone. There are some that are actually fixed. I noticed Clarissa's Haitian friend had brown eyes filled with light. There was a warmth about him. I really liked him. He was very different to Selby's friends, who were so dark by contrast. Clarissa led the Haitian gentleman into Selby's bedroom. We could hear him chanting in the Creole language for a long time. He left my house with a big smile, reassuring me that all was well now. I could tell whatever he had done had drained him of his energy. He looked considerably fatigued. I felt relieved, and the energy in the house was significantly lighter. Clarissa told me I needed to be strong and stand on my faith. She asked me about the stone I was carrying, and I placed it in her hand. "Where did you get this from?" she asked, looking perturbed. "This stone is filled with a light energy. It's very warm." I told her my incredulous story about the Bigfoot on the beach that I had met. "Wow, I'm not kidding, but this stone definitely protected you last night. It's light energy. It repelled the evil in your home. The Bigfoot must be some kind of a light worker. He reached out to help you. He obviously saw the dark energy from your home. There are angels among us, you know, and the Bigfoot you met is clearly one of them." Clarissa walked around my home patiently with the father at her side. We prayed the prayers of St. Benedict and the Archangel Michael. Until this point, everything had remained very calm. But when we entered Selby's room, it was chaotically claustrophobic, very oppressive, thick with a dark, intimidating energy. I could feel the presence of the demon that I'd encountered the previous night. When we prayed in the room, it was filled with a powerful windstorm. The demon was growling at us. The wind seemed to pummel against our clothes, but we stood firm in our faith, and the black mass began to appear before us. Finally it evaporated and vanished, and my whole house was filled with a sparkling light. I'm glad to tell you that I remain in my beachfront home, with no dark energy anymore. My life returned to normal. My home is filled with a loving energy, and things no longer go missing. But even all these years later, I still have a distinct dislike for Selby's room, because I always think of her, and it brings me unpleasant memories of the objectionable woman. I regret to say I haven't seen the Bigfoot again, although I sometimes walk on the beach, hoping for an encounter. but I keep the unassuming Riverstone by my bed at night. I'm glad to say I have never needed it. I often think of my beloved friend Cynthia, and could swear I sometimes sense her presence in my home. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Jamie and I grew up in Denver, Colorado, known as the Mile High City, which has earned an amazing reputation over the years for the 70 breweries that produce the very best craft beers that you've ever tasted in your entire life, without sounding remotely biased, of course. My boyfriend Niall strongly recommends the Imperial Stout Dark Beer from the Hog's Head. So if you're ever in Denver and you enjoy dark beer, this is invariably the choice for you. We are known for our meticulously clean city, low unemployment levels, and let's not forget really amazing food. And for pizza lovers out there, you should try Denver's deep dish, because their pizzas are absolutely brilliant. One word of warning though, if you're watching your weight, grab those loose-fitting clothes, because you'll never be able to resist the sumptuous food on offer in our part of the world. As you can imagine, I grew up surrounded by the most exquisite, ravishing mountainous views, crisp fresh air, and totally breathtaking scenery. If you look to the west, you can see the exquisite statuesque mountains of Mount Evans and Grace Peak. And if you glance towards the east, you'll observe Kansas and Nebraska. We are lucky to live in this part of the world, because although it gets hot, it is a dry heat, which is so much more bearable, with low humidity. So yes, Denver is a very great place to live, and if you like outdoor adventures and pursuits, it'll tick all the boxes for you. I grew up in a very charming residential neighbourhood of West Highlands, where I was raised in a beautiful, elegant, quintessential Victorian home, with my father and mother and my two brothers Eugene and Peter, and as the children of parents working in the medical field, invariably the subjects discussed over the dinner table were always associated with the medical profession. My dad worked as a local doctor and my mother worked as a mortician's assistant, dealing with post-mortems after death, and some of the stories she would invariably tell us, especially about mysterious cases and unusual deaths, would leave me completely spellbound. It was hardly surprising as children that we all naturally gravitated toward the medical profession as our careers after we left school. And even as a little girl growing up, I would dress up in a nurse's outfit and play nursey with a plastic kid's stethoscope and thermometer, and I would go around the house telling everybody that I had made them so very much better, and they had been at death's door, of course. I suppose it was inevitable that I would end up in the medical profession myself, and I chose to become a private nurse, dealing with the death and dying and terminally ill patients, and not for a moment have I ever regretted that decision, as you might expect. So many people ask me here in Denver, why in the world would you become a nurse for the terminally ill? Surely you must get very depressed dealing with the dying, but the reverse is most certainly true. I find dealing with people facing the winter of their lives to be a very great privilege and a huge honour to be bestowed upon me, because dying is indeed a very intimate, personal journey for the patient. In truth, the dying have taught me how to appreciate life and to grab it with both hands, and they've also shown me the value of human relationships and the priceless gift of love. In my job, I work with patients in their home environment, administering drugs like morphine to help with pain management, and some of them even smoke cannabis, as it's legal here in Colorado, to help with pain issues. I also attend to their daily needs, as well as reading and talking to them so that they are never truly alone on their journey. Another aspect of my job involves reassuring family members and helping them emotionally deal with this tumultuous time that they are invariably going through, when heightened emotions are exceedingly raw and moods are turbulent. My story begins when I decided to take on a full-time job with a man living in a cabin in the woods in Aspen in Colorado, which is a gloriously beautiful place to live. It is situated in a remote portion of the Rocky Mountains and is known for its gloriously powdery slopes, quaking aspen trees, and thriving ski resorts, not to mention the all-year-round recreational activities. The summers here are warm and the winters freezing with tons of snow, and when this area is carpeted with snow, it looks like a dreamy winter wonderland. It is so magnificent, and I just love it when the bristlecone pine trees
are literally caked in fresh snow. Without question, this part of the world is ravishingly beautiful, with a population of elk, mule deer and bighorn sheep, and occasionally, soaring above us in the skies, in regal splendour, is the majestic golden eagle, which is, in my opinion, the most majestic bird ever to grace our azure blue Colorado skies. I remember the day that I arrived at Hugo's exquisitely beautiful large cabin, nestled in the heart of the woods, which to me was much more like a palatial timber mansion. It was made from yellow cedar and was outrageously extravagant and opulent, like something you would expect a movie star to own. It was spread out on 2 stories, with numerous balconies, patios and walls of glass, and the inside of the cabin was equally as breathtaking and sumptuously cosy, adorned with exquisite oakwood furnishings, large stone fireplaces, and deep red Persian carpets. When I met the remarkable Hugo, he was an extraordinary man, and it was such a privilege to get to know him. But boy, was he emaciated and thin, and his skin had taken on a very deep yellow hue, which is so typically seen in advanced stage liver disease. It was hard to conceive that the jubilant figure of a well-nourished, happy man in the photograph that I was looking at, showing off a massive fish that he had caught, was indeed the same wasted, scrawly man lying before me in the bed, now merely a fraction of his former self. I could tell by his deteriorating physical condition and extreme muscle wastage that he didn't have much time left, but even though there were times he became disorientated, muddled and confused due to the toxic overload of the liver, which ultimately affects the cognitive brain function, however, there were times he was very compos mentis, and in those moments we would talk about anything and everything together, and these were wonderful moments that I shall never ever forget. As I've worked with the terminally ill for so long, I never pussyfoot around about the subject of death, because I find my patients want to talk about the subject, but are often afraid to talk about it with their family and friends, so they always delight in the fact that I talk about death as easily as I talk about the weather outside, and that invariably is a massive relief to them. In my experience, many families don't want to talk about death and dying to their loved ones, which becomes like the proverbial boomerang in the room that everyone chooses to ignore. But in my experience, the dying person usually knows that their bodies is shutting down, and they do tend to go through that whole dying process shenanigans, from denial to anger to pleading with God, and then finally to acceptance. "Are you afraid to die?" I asked Hugo once. "Oh, heavens no," said Hugo. "As long as I'm not in pain, I'm fine about the dying process. I've had a good long life, and I'm ready for the next stage of my journey." "Does that mean that you believe in a hereafter?" I said. "Oh, most certainly I believe in God and in Jesus, and recently I've been experiencing some very vivid dreams." "That's very common too, well, among dying patients, of course, along with visitations from deceased relatives," I said. "I get that too a lot." "Oh, well, I've had that too," said Hugo. "I've been afraid to tell anyone because I thought they'd think it a side effect of my disease, because you can imagine, when you get liver disease, you do tend to get confused, and people think you're just muddled when you suggest you're seeing people." "Well, tell me about your dreams and visitations," I said. "I'm intrigued and, of course, fascinated." "Well, I've been dreaming of flying and soaring above the cities and clouds through space and beyond time, and then I do find myself floating to a very beautiful city where the roads are literally paved in gold. When I try to enter the city, this very gargantuan, giant-sized man, dressed in white, wearing sandals, keeps telling me it's not my time and I've got to go back. I keep protesting and begging to be let into this beautiful city, but he keeps telling me, "Not yet." "It sounds very beautiful," I said. "Much more magnificent than anything on the earth plane," he sighed longingly. "And if that's heaven, I'd leave this place in a heartbeat. It was that beautiful, and the colours were so bright and luminescent." "What about the visitations?" I asked. "Tell me about them." "Oh, I've been seeing my best friend Ernest. He was an awesome scriptwriter with me in the 80s, and was killed tragically in a motorbike accident when he was flung violently into a tree and killed instantly. I never ever got over his ghastly death, and that's why I drowned my pitiful sorrows in drink. which is why I got myself into this precarious predicament in the first place, with my damaged liver, of course. I drank the wretched, unrelentless pain away, which was not the wisest thing I've ever done. Still, I can't complain, because I've had a very good life. So what does Ernest do when he visits you? I asked. He sits on that chair over there and smiles, and he looks at me and taps his watch and says, "Not long now." He's wearing his Harley-Davidson leather jacket, which is really rather funny because he lived in that thing when he was alive and clearly hasn't taken it off in the afterlife. I sincerely hope they have washing machines up there, or else my friend Ernest is going to pong to high heaven when I see him again. Wow, I said, wow, that is an amazing story. In the weeks that followed, I became incredibly close to Hugo, who has the warmest heart and the most delightful sense of humour. Well, he had it, of course. And as is always the case with dying patients, you become incredibly caught up with the family and their emotional struggles and upheavals during this turbulent, challenging and tumultuous time. And he had a very wonderful, charming family that was so engaged with Hugo and wanted to be very involved in the dying process with him, and to say their final goodbyes when the time invariably came. Luckily, the process of dying, with its so many stages, can invariably prepare the family for the road ahead, which is why so often the sudden unexpected deaths are the worst of all to deal with for loved ones who are left behind. So sometimes a slower death like Hugo's can in fact be a very huge gift. One day when I was accessing YouTube on my Samsung tablet while Hugo was sleeping and I was listening to a series on Bigfoot encounters, because I've always been a huge Bigfoot fan and have been mercilessly teased as a result by my entire family, who seem to believe that my fascination with the hairy critter borders on the insane. I thought I would play it for Hugo to listen to as a change from my usual routine of playing background music for him to listen to. Suddenly Hugo opened his eyes very wide, and as he listened to the encounter, he sat up and smiled, and his eyes grew very wide. "That's not an encounter," he said, remarking about the video that I was actually listening to. "That's just hearsay. Did he see it, or didn't he? Was it a black bear, or was it just a shadow? What was it that crossed his path?" I remember my heart just sank when Hugo was speaking like this. Was he going to ridicule me, like the rest of my entire family, by insisting that Bigfoot was a fictitious creature and that I was completely bonkers for actually believing in him? "Now that's not an encounter," continued Hugo. "Not like the Bigfoot encounter I had as a boy. Now that's an encounter." "You saw Bigfoot," I gasped. "You saw Bigfoot?" "I most certainly did," said Hugo. "Would you like me to tell you about it?" My eyes sparkled with exuberant enthusiasm. "Like I said? Are you kidding? I'd love it." So this was Hugo's story, which I'm about to share with you now. One day when I was about 12 years old, I was playing in the woods with my brother Donovan near our home, which is something I did every single day after school. We adored the woods because it was alive with the most gorgeous birdsong, all kinds of deer, and indigenous wildlife as well. My brother and I befriended a squirrel there, whom had become so tame he would literally run up and down our shoulders and eat out of our hands. We called him Chips, and every time we went into the woods, we would feed him peanuts. We were amazed by how tame Chips was, because all the other squirrels kept a safe distance. But one squirrel, watching our encounter with Chips, suddenly became intrigued, and seeing that Chips could attain immense amounts of peanuts from us, realised that he was missing out enormously, so he overcame his shyness, and soon we had 2 squirrels eating out of our hands. We called the other squirrel Pip. One day as we were feeding the squirrels, we heard this thunderous noise, amazing commotion, and it really seemed like something very big, like an army tank, was speeding through the woods at one heck of a speed. Now, squirrels are very timid, reticent creatures at the very best of times, and yet both Chip and Pip were not at all frightened off by the noise, although the other squirrels invariably were. which seems strangely familiar to them. Donovan and I were petrified by this noise because we hadn't heard anything like it before, but things were about to get a whole lot more frightening for us because bolting through the woods and standing only yards away from us was the biggest creature that the two of us had ever seen. What did he look like? I asked, growing very excited. Well, he was awesome, said Hugo. Words cannot describe the powerful presence that this creature exuded. The energy of this creature was unlike anything I've ever encountered before. He was very big, but his presence was even bigger. He was so masterful and impressive, and very definitely an apex predator. I was in awe and in terror at the very same time. You see, this critter was not something that I knew even existed in America at the time, and the size of this thing boggles the mind. I mean, it was enormous, and for a 12-year-old boy, I was already quite tall, nearing 6 foot, but this thing made me feel pathetically tiny and inconspicuous. He was gargantuan. How big do you think it actually was? I asked. Well, I'd say he was over 10 foot tall. He was about 1,000 pounds, maybe more, maybe less, 5 feet wide, built like an army tank, and very, very stocky and muscular. He was covered with long dark hair that had a very lovely shine and an auburn tint to it. I'd say he had the typical Bigfoot characteristics that are described today, like the typical cone-shaped head, the massive shoulders, huge feet and hands, and overlong arms. Did you think he looked more human-like or ape-like? That's a very good question. I'm not altogether sure, because he definitely had human-like characteristics, but he also had ape-like characteristics, and I can't really discern which was which, but he had an amalgamation of both, if you get my drift. What happened next? I asked. The critter looked very shocked to see us, and when I say shocked, I mean it looked very shocked, as if his cover had finally been blown. He wasn't happy to be spotted by us at all. I sensed that at once. He stood there just goggling at us in a stupefied silence, and for a moment between all of us there was just this long silence. And then a very peculiar thing happened that broke the silence. Chip literally went racing over from us to the big critter and dashed up his body like a great big tree trunk and started nibbling at the Bigfoot's mouth. The Bigfoot immediately popped an acorn in its mouth, sticking it out like a large tongue so that Chip could nibble away at it, and that is exactly what it did. And I realised in horror that the critter was the very reason that Chip was so tame, and it had the magic touch, had absolutely nothing to do with us, as I had vainly so falsely believed. You see, Chip and this critter were really bonded, much more so than with us. I could see that all too clearly now. It was incredible. But aren't Bigfoots supposed to eat squirrels? I said. Well, I'm sure they do, but it would seem that Chip had an extraordinary relationship with the critter, which I guess would make him the exception to the rule, unless, of course, the Bigfoot chose not to eat squirrels altogether. Did the Bigfoot not mind that you were actually watching him feed Chip? No, funny enough, I don't think he minded at all. After a while, he began to relax, because you see, he saw that Chip had befriended us as well, and was darting from us to the Bigfoot, from us back to the Bigfoot again. So, you know, like squirrels go from one tree to the next, rather like that. It suddenly made us seem much more amenable to him. I got the impression that he hadn't particularly warmed to humans in the past before. Well, maybe one of his family members had had a bad experience with a hunter, I suggested. Good thought, said Hugo. I hadn't thought of that. Anyway, my brother Jonathan stepped forward to hand the Bigfoot some peanuts to feed Chip. But the Bigfoot snatched the peanuts and poured them down his throat and ate the whole lot. Now, that was not a small amount of peanuts that he guzzled in 1 second, let me tell you. You mean he just poured them all down his throat in one serving? Oh, yes, chuckled Hugo. It was quite a sight, let me tell you. The Bigfoot then pointed to the packet and then put on a very sad expression on his face, and we all cracked up laughing because he was incredibly comical, and we could tell he was enjoying our laughter. He knew we were laughing at him. After that, he would pull all kinds of contorted expressions for us that were so hysterical that my brother and I were always wetting ourselves. My mother was thinking that we had a serious problem with bladder control, because invariably we would return home with saturated pants, laughing ourselves senseless because that critter was hilariously funny. And when my mother would ask us what was wrong with us, we would be reminded of the critter's hilarious expressions, and we would laugh all the more, and we just couldn't stop. I remember hearing my mother tell my dad that she was extremely worried about our pant-wetting problem that was happening on a daily basis, and she thought we had a serious physical problem with our bladder. My father told her that there were bigger things to worry about than the state of our bladders. For a long time we'd meet up with the squirrel and the Bigfoot, because now the Bigfoot knew we were bringing him peanuts. He was always around, and also he enjoyed the audience that we gave him when we laughed at him so much. He was so comical and so funny, and I just think the relationship with all of us just grew. We all became very fond of each other. We gave him chips and bags of grapes and, peanuts all the time, and it was fantastic. I remember my mother complaining bitterly about the peanuts we were buying and telling us that we might be feeding the entire squirrel population at this rate. She did tend to be a little bit on the tight side in those days. Did you tell your mother about the Bigfoot? Oh, not on your Nelly, are you kidding? My mother was a no-nonsense math teacher. She'd never have believed us in the first place. It took her months to believe us that we were actually hand-feeding squirrels in the woods. She said it was impossible to tame them. Did you tell anybody else about the Bigfoot? No, I know it's strange, but when you meet a critter like that, you really don't want to tell anybody about it. Not only because you might be ridiculed, but because the experience was really rather magical and very special and deeply intimate and personal. I suppose in truth it was something I just didn't want to share with anyone. But you're sharing it with me now. Well, it seems a dreadful waste to die without leaving behind my story for somebody else to enjoy. What happened next? I asked. Unfortunately, when I was 15, I was sent to boarding school. Our parents moved closer to the school so we could come home for the odd weekend. So we never saw Chip, Pip or the Bigfoot we chose to call Bobbin ever again. And believe it or not, he grew to know his name. Now that's an encounter, my dear. Not all this nonsense about black shadows crossing your path. That's hardly an encounter. Wow, it most certainly is an encounter. Thank you so much, Hugo, for sharing it with me. Within a week of hearing about Hugo's extraordinary Bigfoot encounter, he died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family and friends, on the 15th of July 2002 at about 4:30 p.m. The day before he died, he did actually tell me that his best friend Ernest had appeared to him and was tapping his watch extra quickly. He told me that he got the very strong impression that he meant that he would be going very, very soon. All these years later, I think of Hugo with so much love, and his Bigfoot encounter quite literally knocked my socks off, and I hope it will do the same for your listeners. Well, I just want to say that certainly knocked my socks off. And I know it will have knocked the socks off of all my listeners listening. And we feel very privileged that Hugo was willing to share that story with you and pass it on to us, because no doubt anybody who's going to listen is really going to appreciate this story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.